for action. If anyone can navigate this minefield without triggering a panic, it's him. The decision felt like stepping onto a narrow ledge. Finch gathered the fragment and a few crucial documents, wrapping them carefully in brown paper. The rain had ceased altogether by the time he stepped onto the slick pavement, the city breathing a damp, cool breath around him. The streets were alive with murmurs, distant footsteps, the murmur of voices, the occasional clatter of a passing bus. He made his way toward Fleet Street, the historic heart of London's press, where the scent of old paper and brewing coffee mingled with the faint tang of wet stone. The pub was tucked away beneath a wrought-iron sign, its wooden door heavy and worn. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of malt and smoke, voices low and conversations intimate. The crowd was a blend of journalists, locals, and late-night patrons nursing their drinks under the dim glow of amber lamps. Finch found the corner where Simon Drake sat alone, a slender figure hunched over a half-empty pint, eyes flicking through a dog-eared notebook. "Drake," Finch said softly, drawing a glance. The journalist's features sharpened, cautious, but not unfriendly. He gestured to the seat opposite with a practiced ease. Finch settled in, the wood creaking beneath him, and placed the wrapped packet carefully on the table. The fragments of their world, now entrusted to a stranger. They spoke in hushed tones, the murmur of the pub folding around their words like a protective shroud. Finch outlined the bare essentials. 2 RAF pilots, witnessing something impossible near Ashworth, an official report buried deep within the MOD archives, the fragment as tangible proof. He framed it all carefully, emphasizing the need for transparency and the disastrous consequences of silence. Drake listened attentively, eyes narrowing thoughtfully, a slow nod betraying his growing intrigue. "The quiet signal," Finch said, echoing Reed's term from earlier conversations. "Not just a code or a phrase, but a metaphor for the pervasive fear that keeps truth locked away. We want to ask questions, not declare answers." Drake's pen hovered over his notebook, ready but restrained. "This isn't a story of flying saucers," Finch continued, "but of a government afraid to confront an intelligence that challenges everything we think we know." Drake's gaze lifted, meeting Finch's with measured curiosity. "And you trust me with this?" The question was simple but loaded. Finch's reply was steady, resolute. "Because it needs to be told, carefully, without hysteria, before it's too late." The weight of the moment settled between them, heavy yet fragile. Outside, the rain began again, a gentle patter against the windows, as if the world itself was listening. Finch felt the pulse of urgency beneath the calm, the quiet signal growing louder in the depths of the night. The pact was made, the first step beyond silence taken. Finch left the pub with a slow, deliberate pace, the cool air filling his lungs, cleansing and sharp. The streets shimmered under lamplight reflections, a fractured mosaic of light and shadow. In his coat pocket, the fragment felt like a heartbeat against his side, silent, persistent, waiting. Eleanor's tapping pen came to mind, Reed's steady frustration, the buried truths pressing close. Back at the office, the small trio gathered once more, the fragile hope of disclosure flickering in their eyes. The road ahead was uncertain, strewn with dangers both seen and unseen. Yet, beneath the calm surface, a profound shift had begun. The quiet signal was no longer just a whispered fear. It was a call to awaken. Outside, the city breathed on, the rain weaving a steady rhythm that echoed the pulse of a secret long held beneath the surface. And in the deep, dark waters off the Suffolk coast, something ancient stirred, waiting for the world to listen. The morning sun was a pale wash behind a veil of London fog, the city muted beneath its habitual cloak of mist and drizzle. Eleanor sat at her desk in the APRO office, fingers hovering over her keyboard, but eyes lost in the drifting grey beyond the rain-streaked window. The hum of old fluorescent lights mingled with the steady tick of the wall clock, a metronome marking the passage of moments weighed with uncertainty. Today was the day Simon Drake's article was set to appear. A delicate thread stretched taut between exposure and silence. A soft chime from Eleanor's email broke the quiet. She blinked, the moment shattered, and glanced at the screen. The headline from the Thames Chronicle glowed with calm precision. Unseen signals, a quiet truth beneath our skies. The piece was sober, meticulous, without sensational flair. Drake's words framed suspicion with restraint, weaving facts into a narrative that invited thought rather than panic. Eleanor exhaled slowly, a faint relief mingling with the tension coiled tight in her chest. Across town, in a modest flat overlooking Trafalgar Square, Alistair Finch stirred his tea absent-mindedly. The fragments of his corduroy jacket caught a stray gleam from the window. He read the article again, savouring the measured tone, the cautious choice of words that mirrored his own careful approach. Lines highlighted the cold metal piece, the pilot's whispered testimony, and the impossible patterns quietly threading through decades of observation. Finch's mind paced in invisible circles, the article a beacon in the enveloping fog of cover-ups. Reed, back at RAF Ashworth, watched the flickering screen of the base's sparse newsfeed. The article had ignited a spark, the first real ripple in years of bureaucratic stillness. His fingers tapped rhythmically against the side of his chair, mirroring Eleanor's pen tapping miles away. The weight of frustration clung to him, but beneath it stirred a fragile hope. The MOD's silence was cracking, and with it, the first breaths of truth whispered softly into the public space. At the Houses of Parliament, murmurs rose as MPs circulated printed copies of the article. The words had unsettled more than one hardened politician, their quiet scepticism turning to genuine inquiry. A member for Suffolk stood, her voice steady yet edged with concern, questioning the government's handling of unexplained phenomena and the apparent suppression of critical information. The chamber held its breath, the usual din stilled by a new, sober undercurrent of curiosity. In the darkened press office of the Ministry of Defence, Sir Malcolm Sterling sat rigid behind his immaculate mahogany desk. His fingers, long and precise, tapped a slow rhythm on the polished surface. The article festered like an unwelcome shadow. "Transparency is a luxury we cannot afford," he muttered, his voice a blade sharpened by years of quiet fear. His gaze hardened, tracing the outlines of his carefully crafted world, now trembling on the brink. The budget review that threatened APRO's existence was abruptly postponed, a small victory in the storm gathering outside. The phone lines in Sterling's office buzzed incessantly. Journalists, civil servants, and anxious staff flooded the press office, demanding answers or attempting to contain the narrative. The scent of damp rain seeped through the slightly ajar window, mingling with the sterile smell of polished wood and faint traces of old tobacco, a reminder of battles fought in shadows long before. Sterling's calm facade cracked only in the briefest flickers, his serenity a mask calibrated to perfection. Meanwhile, at the Ashdown archives, Miriam Kendrick sifted through decades-old files with renewed purpose. The air was cool and dry, carrying the faint echo of distant footsteps and the soft rustle of brittle paper. Her fingers traced faded typewritten lines, connecting threads forgotten or deliberately erased. The article's publication had emboldened her. There were secrets here, waiting patiently beneath layers of dust and silence. Secrets she was determined to unearth before they were lost again. Back in London, Eleanor's phone buzzed with a new email notification. The sender was unfamiliar, but the subject line read simply, Arthur Hayes, radar operator, 1965. Her breath caught. She opened the message carefully, the words unfolding like a whispered confession. Hayes claimed to have been on duty the night of the original incident that had sparked this long-hidden truth. More than that, he hinted at evidence long withheld, a pulse beneath the static that no one else knew about. Finch received the same email moments later, the tiny screen's glow casting shadows in the dim corner of his flat. He read the message twice, the words settling into his mind with a slow, measured gravity. I have something the government doesn't know, Hayes typed. The notion was both a spark and a weight, a tether pulling the story deeper into the tangled roots of history and memory. Finch rose, pacing the length of the room, the worn corduroy jacket creaking softly as it moved with him. Reed was the last to learn. His phone vibrated by the hearth in his stone cottage on Dartmoor. The wind outside whispered against the ancient granite, carrying the scent of wet earth and pine. He read the email with a steady hand, the flickering firelight casting shadows that danced like ghosts on the walls. The promise of new testimony, fresh proof from a man who carried decades of silence, kindled a quiet resolve. The truth was no longer just a fragile hope, it was a gathering storm. In the cramped APRO office, the three convened again, the metal fragment resting on the cluttered table between them. Their faces were etched with the strain of sleepless nights and guarded optimism. Eleanor brewed tea, the warm aroma a small comfort against the cold uncertainty pressing in. Reed finally spoke, his voice low but steady. If Hayes is what he says, then this changes everything. We need to find him fast. A map was spread across the desk, its creased folds tracing the contours of Suffolk's coastline and the surrounding countryside. Finch leaned in, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. The coordinates Hayes mentioned lined up with areas near the Ashworth base, the site of their earliest mystery. The sense of time folding back on itself was almost cinematic, the past reaching through the present with silent fingers, inviting understanding. Eleanor tapped her pen against her notebook, a rhythmic drumbeat in the quiet room. We'll have to be careful, she said, voice taut with unspoken warnings. If Sterling's men are watching, any move could be detected. Hayes might be in danger too. Her pragmatic mind already raced through contingency plans, coded communication, secure channels. The invisible dance of trust in a world layered with secrets. Finch nodded, the lines on his face deepening with resolve. We owe it to him and to ourselves to listen, to bear witness beyond the fear. This quiet signal may be louder than we ever realized. His gaze flicked to the fragment once again, the cold metal a paradox of weight and silence, proof and enigma. The rain had resumed outside, falling in steady sheets that blurred the city into a watercolor of greys and blues. The hum of electronics and the soft murmur of voices from distant offices were the soundtrack to a world on the cusp of revelation. Within the small APRO room, time seemed to fold inward, the boundaries between past and present dissolving like mist. Eleanor poured the last of the tea into 3 chipped mugs, the warm steam curling in the air like a fragile promise. The team sat in quiet anticipation, the gentle clinking of ceramic punctuating the stillness. Outside, unseen but palpably near, the deep ocean stirred, ancient and patient, waiting for its story to be told. A final message arrived, brief and cryptic, from an unknown source. The tide shift, be ready. The screen dimmed as the email was read in unison, a silent acknowledgement passing between them. The journey was no longer just an academic pursuit or a fight against bureaucracy. It was a passage into something profound, something that demanded courage beyond fear. The fragment, the article, the email, all threads woven into a tapestry that stretched beyond memory, beyond history. The quiet signal had become a call to awaken, and the first echoes were just beginning to ripple through the stillness. As the rain softened, the team prepared to move forward, their steps measured but unyielding. The truth waited, patient and unhurried, beneath the restless tides and the watchful skies. And somewhere out there, a man named Arthur Hayes held the key to what had long been hidden in shadow. The rain had softened to a steady drizzle by the time the team arrived in Norwich, a muted grey overcoat settling around the city like a whisper. They moved quietly along cobblestone streets, glistening with recent showers, their footsteps muffled by the damp. Eleanor clutched her notebook against her chest, the leather worn and creased, while Finch adjusted the collar of his familiar corduroy jacket, his gaze flickering upward toward the slate sky. Reed trailed just behind, his boots tapping a steady rhythm on the slick stones. They found the tea room tucked down a narrow alleyway, its windows steamed with warmth, and the faint scent of brewing leaves curling through the air. The sign above the door swayed gently, painted in peeling gold letters, "The Quiet Cup." Inside, the atmosphere was hushed, intimate, the soft clatter of teaspoons against china mixing with low murmurs and the occasional creak of wooden floors. The walls were lined with dark oak shelves, heavy with ancient books and brittle newspapers, and a solitary oil lamp cast a flickering glow over the worn tabletop where they were to meet. Arthur Hayes was already there, seated near the window that looked out onto the rain-dappled street. His figure was slight, bent with age but steady, a thin wisp of white hair framing a face lined with decades of silence. His eyes, pale and sharp, held a calm that seemed carved from stone, reflecting a lifetime of patient waiting. As he looked up, the lines at the corners softened in a tentative smile, a quiet acknowledgement that the moment had come. Finch approached first, extending a hand with a careful blend of respect and warmth. "Mr. Hayes, thank you for meeting us." Hayes nodded slowly, his fingers closing around Finch's with a practiced firmness. "It's been a long time coming," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of years concealed. "I didn't know if I would ever have the chance to speak." Eleanor settled opposite him, her eyes keen beneath a fringe of dark hair. "We're grateful. What you have could change everything." Hayes reached into the worn leather satchel at his feet with deliberate care, producing a small metal canister. It was no larger than a fist, its surface pitted with age, edges dulled by time and handling. "This," he said, placing it gently on the table between them, "is the real, the tape from '65, the raw radar data." Reed leaned in, the faint scent of sea salt and engine oil clinging to his uniform even off base. "You kept it all these years?" "Yes," Hayes replied, eyes fixed on the canister as if guarding a fragile relic. "I made a copy when the originals were taken, thought it might be important, didn't know then how important." Eleanor's fingers hovered over the canister, her mind racing with the possibilities contained in magnetic strips of data. "May we?" Hayes nodded, rising slowly to retrieve a portable tape deck from a battered case beside him. The machine was a relic itself, its plastic casing scarred but serviceable. He loaded the reel with careful precision, fingers steady despite his years. The quiet whir of the motor filled the space as the tape began to spin. The team leaned closer as the crackling hiss of static gave way to the steady, rhythmic pulse of radar signals, blips flickering across a screen reconstructed in their minds. Finch closed his eyes momentarily, the pattern unfolding like a distant memory. The main object descended steadily into the sea, a singular form moving with purpose beneath the waves. Then, from this central point, smaller targets erupted. Drone-like shapes fanning out in arcs, threading inland as if drawn by unseen lines beneath the earth. The room seemed to hold its breath, the soft patter of rain outside, blending with the unseen signals, tracking a choreography half a century old. Eleanor pulled out a map, spreading it gently over the table. She began to overlay the radar tracks, her pen tracing arcs and curves with a meticulous hand. The shapes matched geological fault lines and the intersections of high-tension power grids, a pattern whispered in the silent spaces between data points. Finch watched the map come alive beneath her touch. "This confirms it," he murmured, voice low and resonant. "The movement isn't random." Reed exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing for a moment. "It's been here all along, hidden in plain sight." Hayes folded his hands, eyes distant. "I was sworn to secrecy, told to forget what I saw, what I recorded, but keeping silent felt worse with every passing year." The tea room's warmth seemed to deepen around them, the murmur of other patrons fading into a background hum. Eleanor tapped her pen absently against the notebook's cover, a habit when the mind sought clarity amidst complexity. "I have more," Hayes said suddenly, reaching back into his satchel for a folded bundle of aged photographs and handwritten notes. His hands trembled just slightly as he laid them out, a precise record of shifts in the radar echoes, annotations marking times, coordinates, and unexplained movements. Each sheet was a window into a moment frozen, a secret kept beneath layers of official denial. Finch traced his finger along one chart, noting a cluster of blips converging near a submerged ridge. The underwater topography could be significant, Finch observed. A base, perhaps, or a habitat. Hayes nodded, eyes glinting with a quiet intensity. "I always believed it was alive, something terrestrial, ancient, not from the stars, but from deep below." The conversation stretched into the afternoon, punctuated by the clink of teacups and the occasional creak of the old floorboards. Their voices softened as they mapped connections between data points and the fragments recovered years earlier. The metal piece on their table, its cold surface a silent witness, seemed to pulse with a new-found relevance. Outside, the rain shifted, the gentle tapping against the window a steady metronome marking the passage of time. The quiet room held the weight of revelations unfolding, of secrets long buried, now surfacing like slow currents beneath still waters. Hayes finally leaned back, a faint smile breaking the earnest tension. "It feels like the burden has lifted, sharing this with those who seek the truth." Eleanor returned the smile, her eyes bright with cautious hope. "We won't let it remain hidden any longer." Reed stirred, checking the time. "We'll need to move carefully." Sterling's watchful, and the shadows lengthen. Finch nodded, standing with deliberate calm. "This is only the beginning. The thread we pull now could unravel everything." They gathered their belongings, the tape canister safely tucked away like a precious seed. Outside, the sky was clearing, shafts of pale sunlight piercing the clouds, casting long reflections on the wet streets. As they stepped back into the damp air, the quiet promise of the tea room lingered, a refuge where the past was unearthed and the future quietly shaped. The signal from decades past had been found. Now it was theirs to follow.
The worn wooden door of the Alpro office closed softly behind them, sealing out the damp chill of a drizzling afternoon. The scent of rain-soaked stone mingled with the faint warmth of old paper and the low, constant hum of aging electronics that filled the cramped rooms. Alistair Finch set the metal canister carefully on the cluttered desk, fingers lingering on the cool surface a moment before undoing the clasps. The reel of tape inside gleamed dully in the muted light, its age marked by faint rust on the edges. Eleanor Vance crouched beside him, eyes sharp beneath the crease of concentration, while Thomas Reed leaned against the stained window pane, the distant sound of dripping water punctuating the quiet. Finch slid the reel into the ancient tape deck, its mechanisms groaning with reluctant life as the machine began to whir softly. The office seemed to hold its breath as the first crackling echoes of the 1965 radar data filled the room, a tapestry of dots and blips unfolding across the screen. Reed's eyes narrowed, tracing the arcs of movement with a pilot's finesse. "See that?" he murmured, voice low but steady. "The smaller objects aren't just drifting, they're moving with purpose. Sharp turns, rapid accelerations. Not random at all." Eleanor reached for a map spread across the adjacent table, its surface worn and creased. With a delicate hand, she overlaid printouts of the radar tracks, aligning the coastline with geological data and the faint lines of power grids etched into her notes. The room grew warmer as the afternoon sun, newly freed from its clouds, cast long shadows through the dusty blinds. She tapped her pen rhythmically against the edge of her notebook, a soft, steady beat that seemed to match the unfolding puzzle. "There's a pattern here. I can feel it. But it's elusive, like the pieces almost fit, but the final shape hasn't revealed itself yet." Finch rose, pacing slowly along the narrow aisle between desks, his worn corduroy jacket whispering against the floor. His gaze was distant but focused, fingers entwined behind his back. "The main object descends into the sea," he mused aloud. "Then these smaller drones fan out inland, pausing at specific points. What are they monitoring? Sending signals? These stopping points, do they correspond with anything known?" His mind sifted through memory and data, the quiet rustle of paper, a constant companion. Reed moved to the window, watching a leaf shiver in a sudden breeze before spiraling to the ground. "Flight profiles suggest intelligence," he said thoughtfully, the faintest edge of his RAF training sharpening his voice. "Coordinated, controlled. They don't behave like machines running pre-programmed routes. There's adaptation, reaction. They almost seem alive." Eleanor's fingers danced across her keyboard, pulling up layers of satellite imagery and seismic maps. The screen glowed softly, illuminating her face in the dim room. She frowned slightly, eyes scanning the data with relentless precision. "These points all lie near fault lines or power line intersections," she noted quietly, "but not all. And some are just off the map, but in places that don't immediately suggest relevance. It's as if the pattern is twofold, geological and artificial. The environment and infrastructure intertwined." Hayes's words from earlier echoed in Finch's mind, the suggestion that this was a terrestrial intelligence, ancient and hidden beneath the waves, sending out its probes to keep watch. It felt both absurd and undeniable. The weight of decades of silence pressed on him, yet the truth shimmered faintly in the data's whisper. "It's not extraterrestrial," Finch breathed, barely above a whisper. "But what kind of being could exist, hidden beneath our oceans, and command such precise instruments?" The soft scrape of a chair interrupted the quiet as Eleanor straightened, her pen tapping against the desk. "We need to cross-reference these points with historical infrastructure developments," she suggested. "Power grids expanded rapidly post-war. Maybe the probes are drawn to the energy flows,
or the magnetic disturbances they create. But the geological fault lines indicate a natural component too, something sensing the Earth's subtle shifts beneath. Reed pulled a worn notebook from his satchel, pages filled with neat diagrams and flight logs. The speed at which the smaller objects move, their sudden changes in direction, it's reminiscent of advanced drone technology, but more organic. There's a fluidity to their flight path. He paused, eyes focused. If they're monitoring tectonic activity, maybe they're warning systems, precursors to seismic events. That would explain the link to faults and power nodes. The team fell into a rhythm, each word measured and deliberate, the room alive with the subtle energy of discovery. Eleanor's fingers hesitated before pulling up archived reports of minor tremors and power fluctuations from the 1960s onward. "Look," she pointed, tracing a luminous line along the screen. "Every time these drones stop or converge, there's a corresponding spike in electromagnetic readings or microseismic events. It's like they're responding to invisible signals beneath the Earth." Finch leaned over, tracing the lines with his finger. The parallels were haunting, a silent communication network, ancient and vast, pulsing beneath the modern world. He swallowed, the enormity settling deep within his chest. "If this intelligence has been here all along," he murmured, "watching, adapting, what does that mean for us, for our understanding of life on this planet?" The afternoon light waned, the room growing cooler. Eleanor fetched a thermos from a cupboard, pouring steaming tea into chipped mugs. The scent of bergamot filled the air, mingling with the metallic tang of old machinery and the faint musk of damp paper. As they sipped in companionable silence, the hum of the tape deck continued, a steady heartbeat beneath their thoughts. Reed broke the quiet voice, thoughtful but cautious. "We can't rush this. Whatever we're dealing with, it's been hidden for decades for a reason. Sterling won't want this coming to light. We need to be precise, careful in how we proceed." Hayes nodded, his lined face shadowed by the glow of the monitor. "I carried this burden too long," he said softly. "But the truth is a tide that cannot be held back forever. It will rise." Eleanor tapped her pen against her lip, eyes reflecting the flickering radar trails. "I'm beginning to see the connections," she admitted. "The pattern is there. We just need to look closer, in the right places, maybe even beyond our usual data sets. Historical records, power company archives, geological surveys. There's something they're trying to tell us." The tape deck clicked as the reel neared its end, the last echoes of the mysterious blips fading into static. Finch reached forward, gently lifting the reel and placing it in its case. The moment felt sacred, a bridge between past and future, a whisper from beneath the waves. A quiet resolve settled over the group, a shared understanding that the path ahead was uncertain but essential. Finch's gaze swept the small office, resting on the tangled cables, the stacks of files, the pale light filtering through grime-streaked windows. "We've found the signal," he said softly. "Now it's time to listen." The rain had ceased entirely, leaving the streets slick and shimmering beneath a pale sky. The city outside moved unaware of the hidden currents shaping its fate. The team prepared to delve deeper, their minds weaving connections and possibilities, each thought a thread, pulling them closer to a revelation long concealed. Eleanor spread out additional charts, her fingers tracing the delicate lines of power corridors and fault zones. "If we can predict where the next drones will appear," she speculated, "we might anticipate the movements of this intelligence, understand its purpose more clearly." Reed unfolded a large-scale map of Suffolk, marking the points where the radar's smaller objects had paused. "These stops," he said quietly, "are too deliberate to be coincidence.
They suggest nodes, checkpoints, or sensors. But why on land when the mother object remains submerged? What is the connection? Finch nodded slowly. Perhaps it's a network, a symbiosis between sea and shore, the ancient and the modern. A consciousness woven through our landscapes and our technologies. The soft scratch of Eleanor's pen filled the silence as she annotated her notes, the delicate sound a metronome to their thoughts. We need more data, she concluded. Historical power grid expansions, recorded anomalies in electromagnetic fields, even folklore. Sometimes myths preserve truths about these things. Hayes, seated quietly in the corner, smiled faintly. I always believed the stories mattered, he said, voice carrying the weight of years. Not just what we see on instruments, but what's whispered in memory and song. Finch caught the timbre of hope in Eleanor's voice as she glanced up. We're beginning to piece it together, she said, but there's still so much we don't understand. This isn't just a mystery of machines or signals, it's a living enigma. The afternoon waned into evening, the city's hum rising beyond the frail walls of the office. Finch stood again, hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the fading light. This tape was the key, he reflected, but the door it opens leads into questions we must be patient to answer. Reed folded his arms, the quiet determination in his gaze evident. We need to prepare then, scientifically, operationally. Whatever this is, it's watching us as much as we watch it. The room grew still once more, a fragile calm after the storm of revelation. Finch felt the pulse of time, the slow unfolding of something vast and unimaginable. The quiet signal was not just a blip on a screen, it was a call, a challenge, a beginning. Eleanor's pen tapped once more, steady and sure. We find the pattern. We have to. The tape deck fell silent, the reel resting in its case like a sleeping secret. Outside, the first faint stars began to pierce the twilight, witnesses to a truth awakening beneath the surface of the world. Eleanor sat alone in the dim corner of the APRO office, the pale glow of her monitor casting sharp relief against the walls lined with old files and peeling paint. Outside, rain tapped irregular rhythms against the window pane, a grey symphony that softened the buzz of fluorescent tubes overhead. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, hesitating before another attempt at weaving a pattern from scattered data. Days had passed in this mechanical pilgrimage, running through weather logs, cross-referencing flight paths, and measuring astronomical alignments. The silence around her was thick, punctuated only by the steady tick of an ancient wall clock and the occasional creak of the building settling. She had hoped for a moment of clarity, a sudden insight that would bring the disparate sightings into sharper focus. But the threads remained stubbornly elusive. Temperature fluctuations, storm fronts, even solar flares, none matched the cadence or locations of the drone movements that had captured their attention. The frustration prickled beneath her skin, a quiet insistence that the answer was not in the when but perhaps elsewhere. The door creaked open softly, and Finch's familiar silhouette appeared framed against the corridor's muted light. His worn corduroy jacket bore the faintest dust from outdoor walks, the collar slightly askew as if in perpetual motion. He approached without haste, his footsteps muffled against the threadbare carpet. Eleanor looked up, her eyes weary but alert, and he nodded in silent greeting. "You've been at it for days," he observed, voice low and steady, carrying the weight of measured thought rather than reproach. What if we shift the question, not when, but where? Eleanor blinked, folding her hands in contemplation. Where, she repeated, the word resonating in her mind like an echo in a cavern. We've been chasing timelines and temporal coincidences, but perhaps the spatial dimension offers more clarity. Finch moved to the map pinned against the wall, a patchwork of sightings marked by pins and faded notes. His finger traced a delicate line connecting 3 scattered points, a cluster near the Suffolk coast, another over the Peak District, and a third in the rugged contours of Devon. The route was neither straight nor arbitrary. It followed an intangible thread, subtle yet persistent. "I wonder if these points align, or if there's something beneath them," Finch murmured. "Not just the surface, but what lies below." Eleanor's gaze sharpened. She stood, smoothing the creases of her blouse, and returned to her workstation with renewed purpose. The quiet whir of her computer filled the space as she began overlaying fresh layers of data, peeling back the surface like an archaeologist, revealing hidden strata. The national grid, with its web of high-voltage lines, appeared first, a lattice of pulsing energy that crisscrossed the country with relentless precision. Superimposed over geological fault lines, a jagged network of ancient fractures and trembling seams, the image began to take shape. Her breath caught in the stillness. The points Finch had traced aligned with these intersections, nodes where the Earth's subtle unrest met human infrastructure. The correlation was not loud or blatant. It emerged slowly like a photograph developing in a darkroom, grainy at first, but gaining definition with each adjustment. Reed stepped into the room, his expression guarded, but intrigued. He leaned over Eleanor's shoulder, noting the overlays with a tactical eye. "Fault lines and power lines," he said quietly. "That explains the drone movements, responsive to both natural and man-made forces." Eleanor nodded, her fingers flying over the keyboard. "It's as if the drones are monitoring these junctions, perhaps sensing shifts in the Earth's electromagnetic field." Haze shuffled in behind them, the careful steps of age echoing against the walls. His eyes, clouded but focused, lingered on the screen. "I've known about these lines for decades," he said softly. "When I worked radar, we'd see strange blips whenever seismic tremors stirred. No one ever believed there was a pattern, though." The room fell into a reflective hush, the faint hum of electronics underscoring the weight of their discovery. Miriam entered quietly, carrying a narrow stack of handwritten logs and faded photographs. She placed the documents on the table with reverence, her eyes distant but resolute. "These records go back further than we imagined," she said. "Folklore, local legends, they all reference strange lights near certain hills and waterways. The stories always spoke of watchers or the silent sentinels." Eleanor absorbed the juxtaposition, the convergence of science and myth, the tangible and the ineffable. The quiet signal they sought was woven into the very fabric of the land, a living enigma that defied easy explanation. The team gathered around the table, the atmosphere charged with a solemn energy. Finch's voice cut through the stillness with calm authority. "Our next step is to map these intersections in detail, predict where the drones might appear next, and understand the connection to the submerged object off the Suffolk coast. This network is a living system. We have to listen carefully." Outside, the rain had softened to a gentle mist, seeping into the stone and soil beyond the window. Eleanor poured tea from the battered kettle, the scent of boiled water filling the air with comfort. As she handed cups to the others, the room seemed to breathe with quiet determination. Reed adjusted the sleeve of his immaculate RAF uniform, a habit he retained even in this cramped office. "We need operational readiness," he said. "If the pattern holds, we could have an encounter soon. The military presence in the area isn't just coincidence." Finch nodded, pacing slowly by the map. His fingers brushed the surface, tracing the lines as if feeling the pulse beneath. "Sterling will resist this. The cover-up runs deep.
but truth has a weight that cannot be ignored forever. Eleanor tapped her pen against the notebook, a rhythmic gesture that steadied her racing thoughts. The data is growing clearer every day. The drones respond to shifts in the electromagnetic spectrum tied to these fault zones and power lines. It's a silent language we're only beginning to read. Hayes smiled faintly, a flicker of relief breaking through his weathered features. It's time these stories saw the light. For 50 years, silence has been the heaviest burden. The room grew darker as evening deepened, the city sounds fading into the background like a distant tide. Finch's gaze lifted to the window where the last of the twilight bled into night. "We're on the cusp," he said, "not just of discovery, but of understanding our place in a broader, quieter world." Eleanor returned to her computer with a renewed focus. Fingers dancing over keys, she refined the overlays, tuning the data until the faintest patterns emerged, whispers of movement, subtle shifts that suggested an intelligence as old as the land itself. The quiet signal was growing louder, not in noise, but in meaning. And as the team worked into the night, a shared conviction bound them, a promise to listen, to learn, and to unveil the mystery that had long lingered beneath their feet. The rain had slackened to a fine mist when Eleanor finally pulled her laptop from the cluttered table, the screen's glow dimming the cramped APRO office in a soft, blue haze. She rubbed her temples, the sharp tap of her pen against the notebook, now slowed to a thoughtful rhythm. Outside, the London sky had settled into a steady drizzle, the distant rumble of traffic muffled by the damp air. The smell of old paper and warmed electronics filled the small room, mingling with the faint aroma of Earl Grey steeping nearby. Alistair Finch stood by the dusty window, his well-worn corduroy jacket folded around his arms. His gaze was fixed beyond the glass, where the city's lights shimmered through the rain. "You've been at it for hours," he said quietly, voice low and steady. "What have you found?" Eleanor tilted the laptop toward him, fingers hesitating just a moment before she clicked through the maps she had painstakingly overlaid. "Look here," she said, pointing. "Every credible drone sighting, almost without exception, is clustered near these intersections." Finch leaned closer, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. The screen displayed a patchwork of colored lines, the jagged traces of geological fault lines superimposed with the rigid grid of the national power infrastructure. At the points where they crossed, dots glowed faintly in an eerie pattern. "The correlation is extraordinary," Eleanor whispered, the excitement in her voice carefully contained, as if afraid to disturb the fragile conclusion. Reed stirred from his seat in the corner, the leather of his jacket creaking softly. "So the drones are drawn to those intersections." His tone was pragmatic, edged with a military precision honed through years of flying missions. "Makes sense in a way. High voltage and unstable Earth. Good place for surveillance, if you ask me." Hayes, seated near the scattered charts, nodded slowly. The elderly man's hands rested lightly atop a sheaf of yellowed radar logs. "It fits with what we saw back in '65. The anomalies we chalked up to equipment faults happened near seismic disturbances, fault lines mostly. No one wanted to admit we were picking up something else." Miriam Kendrick, standing by the door, adjusted her glasses and unfolded a faded tapestry of local folklore on a separate table. "And the stories," she murmured, "about watchers, silent sentinels who guard the land, tie in oddly. They've always said these watchers appear where the earth breathes differently, where power pulses unseen." The group's silence was a quiet acknowledgement of the weight those myths once carried, and might still hold. Eleanor's finger traced the coordinates again.
If the probes use electromagnetic and telluric energy at these junctions, it could explain their behavior. They're not random, they're anchored to the land's deep energy. Finch turned from the window, the faint creak of his jacket the only sound in the room for a moment. "A silent language," he said softly. "One we've only just begun to decipher. If this pattern holds, it might give us a predictive tool." His eyes scanned the faces around him, each reflecting a mixture of wonder and resolve. "We need to test it. Revisit the Rendlesham Forest incident." He gestured toward a map pinned to the wall, the site marked in faded red ink. If those sightings align with these intersections, it would strengthen the hypothesis. Eleanor's fingers danced over the keyboard, bringing up detailed maps of the Rendlesham area. The lines of fault and power crossed just as they had elsewhere, and a faint cluster of dots appeared, matching the dates and times of reported sightings. "It fits," she breathed. Every reported UAP there hovered near the fault power line nexus. Reed rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "It's no coincidence. The military presence there, the radar blips, it all converges on those points. They were tracking something drawing energy from the Earth." Hayes's voice was gentle but firm. "Back then we called it interference, equipment glitches. But now it seems we were witnessing the same pattern, the same silent signal." Miriam moved to the map, her eyes steady. "These intersections have been known to locals for centuries. Folk gatherings, ancient rituals, they mark thresholds between worlds in a sense. Our ancestors must have sensed the shifts, even if they never understood their source." The room fell silent again, the hum of the laptop the only sound breaking the quiet. Outside, the rain had ceased altogether, leaving a fresh, earthy scent on the evening air. Finch's gaze lingered on the map. If the probes are responding to these electromagnetic and geological energies, it suggests they're intimately connected to the Earth itself. Eleanor looked up, eyes bright with a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Not extraterrestrial, then. More a part of the planet's hidden networks than we thought. "Precisely," Finch said, voice barely above a whisper. "Something terrestrial, ancient, watching and waiting." Reed exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing marginally. "And if we can predict where the probes will appear next, we might finally catch them in the act." Hayes's fingers traced the radar logs once more. "We've carried this burden for too long, decades of silence, fear and misunderstanding. Perhaps this is our chance to finally listen." Miriam gathered the folklore texts into her arms, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Stories once dismissed as superstition may hold the key to understanding. Eleanor saved her files and shut down the laptop, the soft click final and resolute. "We have our work cut out for us. Mapping the intersections in finer detail, predicting activity, and preparing for what comes next." Finch nodded, his gaze distant, yet focused. "We stand on the verge of something profound. It's not just about sightings anymore. It's about recognizing a silent language etched into the landscape itself." The group gathered their papers and maps, the room now quiet save for the gentle rustle of movement. Outside, the city lights twinkled through the damp night, a reminder of the intricate web of human life overlaying the ancient earth beneath. As they prepared to delve deeper into the Rendlesham files, the unseen presence beneath the North Sea pulsed faintly in the distance, its drone-like watchers poised once more at the converging lines of power and fault. The silence between them was not empty, but filled with anticipation, a quiet signal calling them toward the next revelation. The morning air in Suffolk was cool and damp, a fine mist settling softly over the rolling fields that led into Rendlesham Forest. Dr. Alistair Finch stood by the roadside, the familiar weight of his worn corduroy jacket settling comfortably over his shoulders as he watched the trees' dark silhouettes shiver in the gentle breeze. The mist blurred the edges of the forest like a watercolor painting left unfinished, lending the place an ephemeral quality, as if it were hesitating between waking and sleep. Eleanor Vance adjusted the strap of her satchel, her breath visible in the cold air, tapping her pen against her notebook in quiet rhythm. Around them the group exchanged glances, each aware they were about to walk into a locus of history, legend, and silence. The gravel crunched beneath their feet as they approached the fringe of the forest. The scent of damp earth, pine needles, and the faint metallic tang of moisture hung thick in the air. Finch's gaze swept over the towering trees, their branches interlacing high above, allowing dappled light to filter through like scattered fragments of memory. "It's easy to see why this place became entwined with the unknown," Finch murmured, voice low and measured. Isolation, shadows, and the hum of unseen currents beneath the ground. The perfect stage. They reached a narrow clearing where an elderly man awaited them, a survivor of the original event, his face etched with lines carved by time and unsaid stories. Flight Lieutenant Thomas Reed stepped forward, extending a firm hand that the man clasped with surprising strength. "Mr. Davies," Reed said, his tone respectful, "thank you for agreeing to meet us." The man nodded, eyes flickering with a mix of fatigue and resolve. "I've waited long enough," he replied, voice gravelly yet steady. "It's time someone listened." Their conversation began beneath the muted canopy, voices hushed against the chorus of forest life, a subtle rustle, distant bird call, the steady drip of condensation from the foliage. Davies spoke of strange lights weaving silently through the treetops, of machines that defied explanation, and of officers who arrived with too many questions but too few answers. "They told us it was nothing," he recounted, glancing around as if expecting unseen ears. "A prank, a misread radar blip. But I saw the glow myself. It wasn't human, and it certainly wasn't ours." Eleanor's notebook filled with precise observations, her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Can you recall the locations? Did you notice any particular landmarks or infrastructure nearby?" she asked. Davies hesitated, then nodded toward the east. "There's a substation not far from here, humming day and night. The forest meets a fault line just beyond that. It always gave me an uneasy feeling, like the ground itself was alive." Miriam Kendrick stepped forward, her serene gaze meeting Davies's. "Have you ever heard local stories, legends tied to these woods?" The old man's face softened. "They speak of watchers, guardians of the land's pulse, strange protectors who move between the earth and sky. I never thought much of it until—" The group exchanged a glance, confirmation growing with each word. Finch pulled out a map, spreading it on the rough surface of a fallen log. The intricate lines of geological faults overlapped crisply with the network of power infrastructure, a bright red dot marking the substation. Every piece of data they'd gathered wove together into a tapestry of uncanny precision. Reed traced the fault line with a gloved finger. Strategically placed. The drone sightings, the power hum, the Earth's fractures. This isn't coincidence. It's surveillance, yes, but on a frequency we're only beginning to hear. Their conversation deepened, turning toward the official investigation. Finch's tone darkened as he described the documents they'd uncovered, the subtle shifts of language that softened extraordinary claims into dismissals. The original reports were carefully shaped, steered toward skepticism. I suspect powerful hands ensured the story stayed buried beneath layers of bureaucratic apathy. Eleanor added, and yet the logs, the radar pulse echoes, they never disappeared. They were just hidden, waiting for someone to look again. The forest around them seemed to close in, the atmosphere thick with the weight of decades of silence. As shadows lengthened, the group made their way to the substation itself, a squat structure of concrete and metal humming faintly with unseen energy. The air here was charged, the metallic scent sharper and almost electric. Reed crouched, running a gloved hand along the fence line, noting the proximity of underground cables and the complex web of wires overhead. If these drones respond to energy intersections, he speculated, then this is a beacon, a marker on their map. Finch's eyes narrowed at the joining of fault and power, the invisible forces colliding beneath their feet. This is the language they speak, the Earth's own Morse code. Leaving the substation behind, they wandered deeper into the forest, guided by fading daylight and the faint hum that seemed to pulse from the ground itself. Miriam's voice broke the silence. Local folklore says the Watchers reveal themselves only when the land's memory stirs. Perhaps these drones are the modern echo of those ancient sentinels. Eleanor's pen tapped insistently as she recorded every word, the rhythm a heartbeat in the quiet. Finch felt the past and present folding together like pages of the same worn book. Back in London, the atmosphere was markedly different. The cramped APRO office, redolent of stale paper and warm electronics, offered little comfort from the persistent feeling of being observed. Eleanor peered through the grimy window, eyes sharp and alert. "We're not alone," she whispered, voice taut with unease. Across the street, a dark car idled beneath a flickering street lamp, its silhouette blurred by the rain streaking the glass. "That's the third time this week," Miriam added softly, brows furrowed. The same vehicle, the same face. Finch's fingers tightened around a mug of cooling tea, the warmth a small anchor against rising tension. They gathered around the cluttered table, the hum of computers blending with the rain's soft percussion. Reed's gaze was steady but guarded. "Sterling's watching us more closely now," he said. "The cover-up isn't just policy, it's personal for him." Finch exhaled slowly, eyes distant. Fear breeds vigilance. He's convinced that exposure would unravel everything. Eleanor tapped her pen rapidly, thoughts racing. "Then we must be smarter, quieter, predict the drone's moves, stay ahead." Miriam nodded, her quiet resolve radiating through the room. Outside, the city breathed around them, cars gliding through wet streets, distant footsteps muffled by puddles, neon reflections shimmering on asphalt. The night was deepening, and so was the unknown. Finch stood by the window, the worn corduroy jacket heavy on his frame, and watched the dark car's passenger peer back at him from behind tinted glass. A shadow waiting, a silent signal sent and received. In the days that followed, the team refined their maps, overlaying historical data with geological surveys and power grid schematics. Each intersection marked a potential convergence point, a node in a vast network humming just beneath awareness. Eleanor's algorithms teased out patterns in the noise, fragments of a silent language whispered through fields and forests, beneath the waves and under the ground. Finch's pacing grew more restless, the weight of revelation pressing against the calm exterior he maintained. They arranged to meet again at Dartmoor, Reed's stone cottage nestled in the mist-shrouded moorland. It would be their refuge, a place where the pulse of earth and sky might be heard more clearly. As they packed their notes and equipment, a sense of impending change hovered like the morning fog, fragile and resolute. The Watchers were stirring, and so were they. The last flicker of autumn sunlight filtered through the grimy window of the APRO office as Finch closed his notebook. Outside, the rain had stopped, the street slick and shining like liquid glass. The quiet signal they sought was closer than ever, waiting to be heard, waiting to be understood, and across town in the shadows, Sterling's cold gaze remained fixed, ever watchful, a still point in the widening storm. The muted hum of the APRO office settled over them like a thin veil as Eleanor leaned over the digital map spread across the cluttered table. The office's single window was streaked with a lingering drizzle, blurring the London skyline into a soft watercolour of greys and browns. Beneath the flickering fluorescent light, the computer screens glowed faintly, casting a pale blue hue across Miriam's thoughtful face. The air was warm, carrying the subtle scent of cold tea and old parchment, a scent that had become as familiar to the team as the unsettlable waiting for the next signal to emerge. Eleanor's fingers paused above the keyboard, her pen tapping rhythmically against her notebook. "I think we've pinpointed the hot spots," she said, voice calm but deliberately weighted. "But without seeing beneath the surface, we're only guessing at what's really there." Her eyes flicked to Finch, who was pacing slowly by the bookshelf, the worn corduroy jacket hanging loosely on his frame, sleeves pushed up to reveal pale forearms. "We need to look at the seabed." Finch nodded, the crease between his brows deepening. "The drone's patterns gather around fault lines that run offshore, close to the coast of Suffolk. If they're terrestrial in origin, it stands to reason that something lies beneath the sediment, something we can't detect from land." His voice was low, steady, imbued with the meticulous certainty of an astrophysicist grounded now in unfamiliar terrain. Reed, leaning against the chipped paint of the battered desk, rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "I know a man," he offered, "who might put us beneath the waves without asking too many questions. Jack Carver." His eyes darkened slightly under the dull light. "Used to be Royal Marines, runs a salvage outfit now, quiet, reliable, not the sort you'd want poking around public docks with a camera." Miriam adjusted her glasses, the lenses catching the light just so. "It would have to be discreet. We don't want to attract Sterling's attention before we understand what we're dealing with." Her voice, always measured, carried an undercurrent of urgency that was softened only by the slow, deliberate way she spoke. Finch stopped pacing and looked toward Reed, who was already pulling out his phone. "Call him," Finch said, "but be circumspect. This operation needs to look routine if anyone's watching." Reed's fingers moved deftly over the screen. Outside, a distant rumble of traffic mingled with the occasional bird call, muted by the window pane and the steady drizzle. "I'm not giving him the whole story," Reed said quietly. "Just enough to get the job done." He hit dial. A gravelly voice answered after a moment, warm with familiarity yet edged with caution. "Reed. Long time." The faint background noise suggested the call came from a boat somewhere near the harbour. "Jack," Reed replied, voice low. "Need a favour? A sonar sweep of a patch of seabed off the Suffolk coast. Nothing flashy, just a discreet scan. I can't explain why, but I'll settle the bill when I'm able. For now, consider it on trust." Silence stretched over the line, then Carver's easy chuckle, rough as gravel. "You always did have a knack for trouble, Tom. Send me the coordinates, I'll see what I can do." The call ended, leaving Reed staring at the phone a moment longer, a slow breath escaping him. When he looked back to the group, the mood had shifted into something quieter, a shared anticipation threading through the room like a low current. Miriam broke the silence. "Funding?" Finch's hands folded carefully atop the table. "We'll conceal it within APRO's operational budget. A routine equipment upgrade, something generic, no flags raised." He exhaled slowly. "If Sterling pokes around, he'll see nothing unusual. We keep the paper trail clean." Eleanor began plotting the coordinates on her screen, the blue glow illuminating the sharp angles of her jaw. The survey will cover the area where we suspect the main fault lines intersect with high-tension lines feeding the coastal substations. If there's an object or anomaly, sonar should reveal it. Her voice softened as she added, and if the drones are drawn to those intersections, then maybe this will be the key. Outside, the rain softened to a drizzle, the sound of droplets pattering against the window pane, a steady, comforting rhythm. The room felt smaller, the walls closing in with the weight of unsaid possibilities. Finch looked out toward the street, where a dark sedan had settled again, idling quietly beneath a flickering streetlight. Sterling's watchful presence was a shadow always nearby, a reminder of the high stakes. "We convene at Dartmoor after the survey," Finch said, voice low as the hum of the electronics. "Reed, you coordinate with Carver. Eleanor, continue refining the signal patterns. Miriam, archive what we have, everything. If this is what we think it is, we'll need every piece." Eleanor nodded, tapping her pen with a steady rhythm. "Understood." "Good," Finch said, turning back to his pacing, fingers tracing the threadbare fabric of his jacket. "The quiet signal is coming. We just need to listen closely enough." The glow of the monitors flickered, casting long shadows across the cluttered office, wrapping the team in a cocoon of quiet determination. Outside, the London rain whispered against stone and glass, a steady pulse beneath the city's restless heart. Reed's car wound through narrow country lanes, the headlights piercing the mist that pooled low over the fields. The scent of wet earth rose with every dip and incline, mingling with the crisp night air. His mind replayed the brief conversation with Carver, the old Marine's gruff assurance echoing like a lifeline. He arrived at a small weathered boathouse, nestled against the edge of a quiet harbour. The wooden planks creaked softly underfoot as he pushed open the door, revealing a dim interior thick with the smell of salt and diesel. Hanging nets and rusted hooks lined the walls, remnants of a past life tied to the sea. Jack Carver stood silhouetted against the dull light of an oil lamp, his face lined and weather-beaten, eyes sharp beneath a mop of tangled grey hair. "Tom," he greeted, voice low and steady. "Figured you'd show. What am I looking for this time?" Reed hesitated, the urge to share the truth warring with the weight of secrecy. "Something beneath the waves, something that doesn't belong to any known vessel or geological formation." Carver's gaze hardened for a moment, then softened. "You've got ghosts, Tom, but I'll help. Give me the coordinates and I'll get my crew on it." The two men unfurled a rough map, edges curling with salt and age. The points marked were precise, annotated in Finch's meticulous handwriting. The sonar vessel moored just beyond the harbour would begin its sweep at dawn, its sensors slicing through the cold North Sea beneath a grey sky. Outside, the wind whispered through the rigging of nearby boats, the faint creak of ropes and lapping water a lullaby to the night. Back in London, Eleanor sat alone at the APRO office, her silhouette outlined by the cool glow of multiple monitors. Tapping her pen against the desk, she sifted through layers of data, ambient noises, electromagnetic readings, drone flight logs, all folded into complex algorithms that churned in the quiet hum of processors. A faint smile touched her lips as a pattern emerged, subtle and almost imperceptible, like a thread woven through static. It was a language without words, a rhythm beneath the chaos. She made notes, cross-referencing geological maps with the electrical grid, her thoughts wandering to the watchers as described by Miriam, guardians, sentinels from time immemorial, communicating impulses and signals too quiet for most to hear. The rain against the window softened, the city's distant murmur fading into the background.
Eleanor poured a fresh cup of tea, the steam rising in a small, fragrant curl, grounding her in the moment as the night stretched ahead. At Dartmoor, Thomas Reed sat by the peat-smelling hearth, the stone walls absorbing the warmth. A map and compass lay on the rough wooden table beside him, alongside his logbook and a flickering oil lamp. Outside, the moor's mist crept close to the cottage windows, blurring the wild landscape into ghostly shapes. He traced the path of the fault lines with his finger, thinking of the drone's silent dance along the invisible fractures beneath earth and sea. The solitude here offered clarity, even as his thoughts churned with questions. A faint knock at the door stirred him. Opening it, he found Miriam standing, her coat damp from the drizzle. Her calm presence settled the room like a balm. "We're ready to move forward," she said quietly. "We have a plan. The survey will begin at dawn." Her eyes held a mixture of hope and caution. Reed nodded, closing the door behind her. This is it, one step closer to the truth. The following morning, the sonar vessel cut a slow arc over the cold North Sea, its engine a low, steady pulse against the muted light of a heavy sky. On deck, Carver and his small crew monitored screens and instruments, the sea spray cold against their faces. Beneath the waves, the sensors mapped contours and anomalies, shadows that defied known geology, shapes that lingered just beyond explanation. The water smelled of salt and something older, something untouched. As the sweep progressed, Carver's brow furrowed. "There's something down there," he muttered, voice barely above the wind. "Not rocks, not wreckage." Reed stood beside him, the weight of the moment pressing down like the thick grey clouds overhead. "Keep scanning. Every detail counts." Back at APRO, Finch sat alone amidst stacks of files and humming equipment, rereading notes from the 1965 case. The lines between past and present blurred, the same patterns, the same silence broken only by the occasional flicker of faint signals. His fingers traced the worn edges of a metal fragment, cold and dense, unlike anything terrestrial. The mystery deepened, pulling him into the slow, rhythmic dance of signals and shadows. Outside, the city breathed under a pallid dawn, the quiet signal waiting to be heard. The team gathered once more in the cramped office, the air thick with anticipation. Eleanor's eyes shone with quiet excitement as she laid out the preliminary sonar data, patterns emerging in shades of blue and black. Miriam added archival context, layering folklore alongside geology and modern technology. The Watchers, the Sentinels, they were all threads in the same tapestry. Finch looked at each face, his resolve steady as the slow pulse of the earth beneath their feet. "We proceed carefully. Sterling's eyes are everywhere. But the truth is coming to light." A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the sky, a muted herald for the days ahead. That evening, Reed sat alone in the moorland dark, the wind whispering secrets through the gnarled branches of ancient trees. His gaze drifted upward, past the clouds to the indifferent stars. The echo of the drone's silent flight resonated in the stillness, a quiet signal reaching through time and space. Somewhere beneath the waves, beneath the earth itself, something stirred, watchers waiting, watching, listening. He closed his eyes, breathing in the cold air, the scent of peat and rain, blending with the salt from the distant sea. The pattern was becoming clear, and the quiet signal was about to speak. The narrow lane wound through emerald fields, bordered by ancient hawthorn hedges, the scent of damp earth mixing with a faint salt tang carried inland on the morning breeze. Overhead, a quilt of muted clouds scraped softly against the pale blue, lending the sky the fragile translucence of frosted glass. Alistair Finch drove steadily, his gaze flicking intermittently to the passing countryside, the rhythmic tap of the wiper blades against the windshield marking time. The corduroy jacket he wore felt heavier than usual, its familiar weight a small comfort amid the mounting tension. Beside him, Thomas Reed sat upright, hands clasped tightly in his lap, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. They spoke little, the silence stretching between them like the quiet swell of the North Sea beyond the horizon. The landscape gradually flattened as they approached the coast, the patchwork of fields giving way to patches of rough grass and scrub, the faint outline of boats bobbing gently within the confines of a small harbour. A solitary gull wheeled above the water, its plaintive cry muffled by the soft murmur of distant waves. The harbour itself was a modest enclave of weathered timber and peeling paint, the dockside cluttered with coils of rope and battered crates that smelled faintly of salt and fish. A Listair pulled onto a narrow concrete slipway, the tyres crunching softly over pebbles smoothed by decades of tidal action. They stepped out into the cool morning air, the chill biting through their layers despite the rising sun. The sea stretched before them, a vast expanse of muted grey-green, rippling in gentle swells beneath the low-hung clouds. The wind carried the sharp scent of brine and kelp, mingled with the faint metallic tang of rusted anchors and salt-stained chains. Boats of all sizes rested in the harbour, fishing trawlers with chipped hulls, a solitary yacht with taut sails furled, and beyond them the vessel they had come to see. The North Star was small but sturdy, its dark wooden hull scarred by years of service and salt water. A modest wheelhouse, weather-worn and etched with sun-bleached lettering, rose above the deck, cluttered with coils of wire and sonar equipment. The boat rocked gently with the rhythm of the tide, a silent promise of steadfast endurance amid the shifting sea. Standing near the stern, Jack Carver was a figure shaped by the very elements around him. Broad-shouldered and erect, his weather-beaten face framed by grizzled hair and a beard flecked with silver. His hands, calloused and steady, moved with deliberate precision as he checked the sonar instruments. Carver's eyes, pale and clear despite their age, met Reed's with a subtle nod. There was an unspoken understanding between the two men, a shared language of salt and storm, of secrets hidden beneath the waves. Alistair approached cautiously, feeling the rough wood of the deck beneath his boots and the cool spray of mist carried on the wind. The vessel smelled of aged oak and engine oil, with an undercurrent of seaweed and coal dust. Jack's voice was low and steady, the timbre of someone accustomed to long hours in solitude. "We'll cast off at first light," he said, gesturing to the horizon where the pale glow of dawn was just beginning to bleed into the west. "The tides are running steady and the sonar's been tuned. We'll sweep the seabed, keep our eyes peeled for anything that defies logic or chart." His gaze lingered on the instruments, then flicked to Alistair. "I've seen things out there that don't fit any map, shapes that shimmer and disappear." The three men stood silently, watching as the last of the stars faded and the sky brightened to a muted wash of lavender and soft pink. The harbour began to stir. A few fishermen dragging gear, a gull resting on a mooring post, the distant clang of a buoy swinging against its chain. The moment was heavy with anticipation, the calm before the plunge into mysteries that had lingered beneath these waters for generations. Carver's hands moved to secure the mooring lines. The boat's timbers creaked softly in reply. Retreating to a nearby cafe perched on the edge of the harbour, Alistair and Reed sank into faded leather chairs by a fogged window. The interior was warm and dim, redolent of brewing tea and stale wood smoke.
The walls were lined with old maritime photographs, sepia-toned images of trawlers, storm-beaten captains, and coastlines long changed by tides and time. A low murmur of quiet conversation mingled with the clink of ceramic cups and the occasional hiss of the espresso machine. Outside, the sea darkened beneath a shrouding mist that veiled the horizon. They ordered tea. Endless cups, steaming and strong, the tannic bitterness a steady comfort to their frayed nerves. Eleanor's habit of tapping her pen echoed faintly in their thoughts, though she was absent. Instead, the silence between them was punctuated by the gentle clatter of teaspoons against china and the occasional scrape of leather seating. Reed's fingers drummed a restless rhythm on the table, mirroring the subtle pulse Alistair had detected in the data streams. Around them the air was thick with unspoken questions and the weight of secrets held just beneath the surface. The cafe's windows steamed as the chill persisted outside, droplets forming and sliding down the glass like slow tears. Across the harbour, the North Star lay anchored, a dark silhouette against the breaking day. Alistair's gaze drifted to the water's edge, where seaweed clung to rocks slicked by the tide, and small fish darted just beneath the surface. The smell of salt and damp wood seeped through the open door, mingling with the faint aroma of roasting coffee and freshly baked scones. Time seemed suspended, the world reduced to the steady breathing of the sea and the quiet hum of anticipation. Reed finally broke the silence, voice low and careful. "You think Carver's ready? This isn't a usual survey. There's things out there that don't want to be found. Shapes shifting in ways that defy the geology." His eyes flicked to Alistair's, searching for reassurance. "We're crossing lines, aren't we?" Alistair took a slow sip of tea, feeling the warmth spread through his chest. He nodded, though the knot of apprehension in his stomach remained. "We have to. The signals, the patterns, they're all pointing here. The watchers beneath the waves. If we don't look, we'll never understand." He allowed himself a brief smile, dry and tentative. "Besides, if we don't uncover the truth, someone else will, and they won't be so careful." Outside, the mist thickened, curling in tight fingers around lampposts and weathered benches. The sea, once a steady pulse, had softened to a gentle murmur as if holding its breath. The harbour lights flickered, casting elongated shadows that danced across the wet cobbles. The day was still young, the promise of revelation balanced precariously on the cusp of dawn. Somewhere beyond the veil of fog, the North Star awaited, ready to cut through the quiet waters toward the unknown. The cafe door opened and closed softly, a bell tinkling faintly as a figure entered. Miriam Kendrick, her presence as quiet as the shadows she moved through, approached their table carrying a sheaf of papers. Her eyes, sharp and steady behind thin spectacles, met Alistair's with a hint of urgency tempered by calm resolve. She laid the documents between them, the pages whispering softly in the stillness. "The survey parameters are set. Jack's prepared. They'll begin the first sweep in less than an hour." Alistair unfolded the papers, the print crisp under the warm, fading light. The maps of the seabed revealed subtle anomalies, dark patches where sonar returns faltered, faint lines tracing fault zones beneath the silt. He ran a finger along one such mark, imagining the unseen watchers waiting below, silent sentinels entwined with earth and sea, the weight of history pressed down, centuries of quiet observation folded into these faint shapes on a page. Reed leaned in, tracing the contours with a practiced eye. "Those ridges, they don't match any known geological shifts. There's something else down there, something old." His voice was barely above a whisper, as if speaking louder might shatter the fragile moment. "If Carver's sonar picks up a reading here, It'll be like opening a door long sealed. Outside, the mist had begun to lift, revealing a hardening sky washed in pale steel. The harbour bustled now with morning activity. Seagulls wheeling and diving, nets being hauled, the low murmur of engines warming, the cold sea air pressed against the window panes, carrying the distant sound of water lapping against wooden pilings. The world felt at once vast and intimate, the edges of mystery pulled taut by the day's unfolding. Finch folded the maps carefully, the paper crackling in the quiet. We'll wait here, keep watch. Jack knows these waters better than anyone. When the sonar starts singing, we'll listen closely. The watchers have been silent far too long. His voice was steady, though deep within, the steady rhythm of his heart quickened. The path ahead was uncertain, fraught with unseen perils, but it was a journey they had to take. Reed's gaze drifted across the harbour, settling briefly on the North Star as she slipped her moorings, the ropes creaking softly in protest before releasing. A faint wave of movement rippled outward, carrying the boat gently into the open sea. Behind them, the cafe's warmth faded, replaced by the cool, salt air and the endless horizon. The silence between the two men deepened, a shared breath held in the stillness before the plunge. As the vessel disappeared beyond the breakwater, Alistair returned his attention to the steaming cup before him, the swirling tea mirroring the eddies of uncertainty within. The days stretched ahead, fragile and endless, a delicate thread woven between sky and sea. Somewhere beneath the waves the watchers waited, patient, inscrutable, and as old as the earth itself. The quiet signal was about to be heard. The phone's soft chime shattered the quiet that had settled over Reed's cottage like a mist. It was late, well past midnight, and the familiar, terse voice of Jack Carver cut through the stillness with an odd edge. "We've got something. You should see this." Reed sat up straighter, the wooden frame of his armchair creaking beneath him. "Now." His voice was measured, but a taut thread of anticipation laced it. He glanced instinctively towards the old clock on the mantel. The dial glowed faintly in the dimness, the second hand ticking steadily, like a heartbeat. "How soon?" "Meet me down at the harbour. 20 minutes. You'll want to see it. First hand." Carver's voice held a quiet urgency unusual from the usually blunt man. Reed nodded to himself, then reached for his coat hanging by the door. Outside, the night air was thick with the smell of brine and cold stone, a breeze whispering through the narrow streets like a secret. The harbour was hushed and draped in fog as Reed approached. The North Star's silhouette was a shadowy outline against the water, its lights dimmed for the hour. Wooden planks creaked beneath his boots, damp with the sheen of the evening mist. Jack was waiting by the cabin entrance, his face drawn and lit by the faint glow of the instrument panel inside. "Alistair's on his way," Jack said without preamble, leading Reed through the narrow gangway. The interior of the cabin was small and lined with aged pine, the air smelling of salt and engine oil. Screens flickered with sonar scans, layers of green and blue shifting slowly across the displays. Reed's fingers brushed the cold metal edge of the console, grounding himself against the mounting tension. The room was hushed except for the soft hum of electronics and the occasional beep from the sonar's outputs. Jack pointed at the central monitor. "Look at this." The screen displayed a swath of seabed rendered in sharp gradients of shadow and light, the topography rendered in near photographic detail. Most of the area was unremarkable, flat, silted plains with occasional ridges, but in the middle something disrupted the monotony. There it was, A vast, circular form rising slightly from the seabed, its edges crisp and geometric against the organic undulations of the ocean floor. Half a mile in diameter, it looked impossibly precise, an immense disk partially buried in sediment. The shape exuded an unnatural symmetry, a deliberate design so stark it seemed to challenge the very laws of nature. Reed leaned in, eyes narrowing as he traced the outline, with a finger hovering just above the glass. Artificial, he breathed. His tone was low but steady, as if naming it aloud anchored the surreal sight back in reality. There's no way that's a natural formation. Jack's gaze was fixed, unreadable. We've never seen anything like it. The silt's thin enough to make out some surface features. Sharp ridges, a kind of lattice pattern, almost like an exoskeleton. But it's buried deep and the sonar can only take us so far. The cabin grew colder, the walls seeming to close in with the weight of the revelation. Reed felt a shiver despite the coarse wool of his sweater. He ran a hand through his hair, the damp strands sticking slightly. The silence stretched, thick as the fog outside the windows, until finally he spoke. We need to bring Finch down here. He'll want to see this for himself. Jack nodded, his eyes never leaving the screen. Already called him, he's on his way. The weight of what they faced settled heavily between them. The seabed's quiet, fathomless depths held a relic of a world older than memory, something that defied explanation. It was no longer just a theory whispered in hushed tones. It was tangible, a silent testament waiting beneath the waves. Reed stepped back, the rough wood of the cabin floor creaking again underfoot. He gazed out through the porthole at the dark expanse beyond, the sea like molten glass folding into endless black. The mist hung low, blurring the horizon to a faint, trembling line. Somewhere below, the watchers waited, their presence suddenly undeniable. Jack broke the silence. We can run a more detailed sweep in the morning, but tonight's data is clear. That disk, whatever it is, it's real, and it's massive. Reed swallowed hard, the cold taste of adrenaline mingling with the salt air. We're standing on the edge of something profound, he said softly, and we've only just begun to understand what it might mean. The door creaked as Alistair entered, his familiar corduroy jacket slightly damp from the fog. His eyes, normally so composed, flickered with a quiet intensity as he joined the others by the console. He studied the screen in silence, the room's dim glow reflecting in his glasses. A perfect disk, Finch murmured, voice barely above the whisper of the sea beyond. He began pacing slowly, the cadence steady, each step measured. The geometry suggests design, yes, but the scale... It's unlike anything in human engineering, especially underwater. His gaze settled back on the sonar image. Half a mile wide, that's not just a structure, it's a message, a monument, or perhaps a sentinel. Jack shifted uneasily, the faint creak of his boots mingling with the soft beeping of the sonar. If it's a sentinel, it's been here a long time. The silt covering it is at least centuries thick, but the sharpness of the edges... He trailed off, unsettled. Eleanor's voice, calm and precise, came softly from behind them as she entered the cabin. She held a notebook, pen poised as always. I've been cross-referencing the survey coordinates with historical geomagnetic data. That disk aligns almost perfectly with the intersection of several fault lines and a high-voltage power grid node on land. Reed exchanged a glance with Finch. The pattern they'd been chasing for months now emerged in stark relief, the arcane dance of technology, Earth, and deep time intelligence coming into focus. Eleanor tapped her pen thoughtfully on the notebook's spine. Whatever this is, it's no accident. The cabin grew colder still, the night outside pressing in like a living thing. The three of them stood clustered around the glowing console, each absorbed in the quiet gravity of the moment. The sea whispered secrets through the hull, ancient and unfathomable, drawing them closer into its silent depths. "Are we certain this isn't a natural phenomenon?" Reed asked, his voice steady but layered with wonder. Finch shook his head, eyes never leaving the screen. Nature rarely crafts such perfect geometry at this scale, especially under thousands of feet of water and sediment. And the lattice pattern, no known geological process produces such regularity. Jack lit a cigarette, the small flare of flame briefly illuminating the weary lines of his face. He exhaled slowly, the smoke curling upward, the scent sharp against the damp cabin air. Whatever it is, it's been hidden well. The seconds stretched longer, the only sound the subtle pulse of the sonar and the occasional creak of the vessel settling on restless waves. Eleanor's fingers traced the edge of the notebook thoughtfully, her pen poised but still. Reed's eyes fixed again on the screen. The disk shimmered faintly in the sonar's glow, as if it breathed beneath the layers of silt and shadow. The thought struck him. This was not just an object, it was a threshold. Alistair stopped pacing and looked out the porthole toward the black water's endless reach. "We have to be careful. Disturbing it could have consequences we can't predict." His voice was calm, but the weight behind it was unmistakable. "This presence beneath the waves has remained silent for centuries. We are the first in a very long time to hear its quiet signal." The room settled into a contemplative hush. Outside, the fog thickened again, muffling the world beyond the harbour's edge. Time seemed to fold, the night stretching into something both infinite and fragile. Jack finally broke the silence, voice low and steady. "We'll run another sweep at first light. Till then, we wait and prepare." As the cabin lights dimmed just slightly, the three of them remained rooted in place, the glow of the sonar screen casting ghostly shadows on their faces. The quiet signal pulsed beneath the waves, a rhythm so slow and profound it defied human comprehension. Finch's gaze lingered on the disk. "Whatever this is," he said softly, "it changes everything." Outside, the sea whispered on, ancient and indifferent. The night deepened. The tires whispered over the slick asphalt, the road unspooling in dark ribbons beneath the pale wash of street lamps. A low mist clung to the windshield, traced with thin rivulets where the wipers had passed moments before. Inside the car, the air was thick with silence. Not the comfortable kind, but a taut, almost reverent stillness born of exhaustion and the immeasurable weight of what they had seen. Alistair Finch sat rigidly in the passenger seat, his hands folded in his lap, fingers twitching occasionally as if trying to count some impossible equation in his mind. The worn fabric of his corduroy jacket creaked softly when he shifted, a faint reminder of the years folded into its seams. Outside, the countryside slipped past in shadowed blurs. Skeletal trees, dark fields, the occasional glint of a distant farmhouse window. The cold night air insinuated itself through the edges of the window frame, carrying with it the faint, briny scent of the nearby sea. Thomas Reed drove with his jaw clenched, eyes fixed on the road, his hands steady yet cautious on the wheel. The glow of the instrument panel cast a muted light across his uniform jacket, its immaculate creases a stark contrast to the disarray of his mind. The quiet was broken only by the soft hum of the engine and the occasional sigh escaping him, a breath that seemed to carry both frustration and a reluctant acceptance. Neither man spoke. Words felt inadequate, as if to voice their thoughts would somehow diminish their weight. The landscape changed as they neared London. Streetlights multiplied, their orange halos thickening the fog, the occasional neon sign flickering in the distance. The air grew heavier, warmer, but no less charged. Finch's gaze shifted to the rearview mirror, catching his own reflection for a fleeting moment. The pale, drawn face of a man who had glimpsed something beyond comprehension. He blinked, trying to steady his pulse, willing himself back into the present. Reed pulled into the narrow lane that led to the APRO office, the cramped brick building barely visible through the encroaching fog. The faint glow of a single desk lamp leaked from a window upstairs. Eleanor was waiting. The knowledge of her presence was a small comfort, a tether to the world they inhabited, rather than the abyss they had glimpsed beneath the waves. Finch stepped out first, the cold air biting through his jacket, the faint smell of damp earth and old stone mingling with the ever-present hint of the sea. Reed followed, hands shoved deep into his pockets, the tap of their boots on the cobblestones sharp in the quiet night. The door creaked open, the interior smelling of dust, paper, and the faint electrical hum that always seemed to linger in the cramped rooms where forgotten truths slept. Eleanor stood by the battered wooden table, her silhouette etched against the pale light of the computer screen. She looked up as they entered, her expression a mixture of hope and apprehension. Her eyes, sharp and searching, flicked quickly between them, silently asking the question they all already knew the answer to. Without a word, Finch pulled out the laptop, fingers moving deliberately as he brought up the sonar data. The screen illuminated the dark room with ghostly blue light, revealing the image of the enormous disk lying beneath the seabed. A perfect, flawless circle 1/2 mile across, its edges impossibly sharp against the grainy sediment. The lattice-like pattern of its surface shimmered in the scan, an otherworldly geometry that defied natural formation. Eleanor leaned in, eyes narrowed as she traced the contours. It matches the intersection of the fault lines and the power grid node, exactly, she murmured, tapping her pen thoughtfully against the table. The sound echoed softly, a kind of staccato punctuation in the room's heavy stillness. Not just a coincidence. It's deliberate. Someone, or something, placed it there with intention. Reed's voice broke the spell. If that's true, then it's not just a monument. It's a message, or a sentinel, something to watch or warn. His dark eyes held a flicker of the dry humor he usually kept tethered deep inside. Maybe both. Finch nodded slowly, the lines on his face deepening as he stared at the image. It's older than any technology we know, older than anything recorded, and yet it's artificial, not geological. That changes everything. They sat in a circle, the glow from the screen casting long shadows against the peeling wallpaper. The silence returned, filled with the unspoken fears and questions. What did this mean for humanity's place in the world? Were they the first to find it, or merely the latest in a long line of watchers? How many had glimpsed this truth and been silenced before? Eleanor broke the quiet again, her voice steady, but tinged with exhaustion. We need to be cautious. Any disturbance could trigger responses we don't understand. Finch's warning is clear. This isn't just an archaeological site. She looked to Reed. We'll need more data, a detailed sonar sweep at dawn, but we can't tell anyone else yet. Not until we understand what we're dealing with. Reed rubbed the back of his neck, the tension etched across his brow, deepening. The military is going to want to know what they already do. We're at the edge of something they can't control. Finch's fingers drummed softly on the table, the rhythm slow, deliberate. Which is why we must proceed carefully. The stakes are higher than anyone realizes. If this leaks, it could unravel the very fabric of society's understanding of reality. Eleanor's phone chimed abruptly, the sudden noise slicing through the quiet like a knife. She glanced down, her face draining of colour as she read the message. "It's from Sterling," she said, her voice low, almost disbelieving. He's disbanding APRO, effective immediately. All operations shut down, personnel to stand down and return to previous posts."
The room seemed to contract, the air growing colder, heavier. Finch's breath came slow and measured, but inside a storm was gathering. Reed's jaw tightened, dark eyes flashing with a mixture of anger and helplessness. Eleanor's hands clenched into fists, knuckles white against the table's rough surface. "After everything," Reed muttered, voice rough with frustration. "After what we've just found." Finch's gaze hardened, the quiet strength of a man who had faced denial and dismissal for decades settling over him. Sterling fears what this means, the collapse of certainty. But shutting us down won't stop the truth from emerging, it only delays it. Eleanor looked up, determination flickering in her eyes despite the fatigue. "We'll have to go underground, work outside the system. If this is the heart of the mystery, then it's only the beginning." The three of them sat in the dim light, the weight of the night pressing down like a tangible thing. Outside, the city buzzed quietly, unaware of the silent sentinel resting beneath the waves, waiting, watching, as it had for millennia. Finch rose slowly, the creak of his jacket the only sound as he moved to the window. The mist had thickened, blurring the streetlights into halos. The world outside softened and strange. He pressed a palm to the cold glass, his reflection merging with the fog, a ghost among shadows. "We've found the signal," he whispered. "Now we have to listen." The night stretched on, endless and full of possibility, as the quiet signal pulsed beneath the ocean's dark surface, waiting for the moment to speak again. The lamps in the APRO office flickered softly as a thick fog pressed against the grimy windows, muting the world beyond. The usual hum of London was absent, swallowed by the moist silence settling over the streets. Finch stood by the cluttered desk, eyes tracing the edges of the sonar images displayed on Reed's phone, which he held gingerly, as if afraid it might dissolve in his hands. The circular pattern beneath the sea, so precise, so alien, seemed to pulse faintly, an unseen heartbeat beneath the waves. Eleanor leaned against the doorframe, her pen tapping irregular rhythms on the brass handle, a nervous habit amplified by the sudden weight of Sterling's order echoing in her mind. "Disband, disband." The word looped, a command cutting through years of silent work, unspoken truths, and fragile hopes. Reed paced in the background, his uniform replaced by a worn jacket, the stiffness in his body betraying his frustration. The military pilot, grounded by secrets, now grounded again by bureaucratic decree. The room smelled of old paper and stale coffee, shadows pooling in corners untouched by the yellow lamplight. Finch ran a hand through his thinning hair, the corduroy jacket he always wore feeling heavier than usual. "We can't go back," he murmured, voice low and steady despite the storm inside. "They'll seize everything, the data, the tapes, our work. We disappear if we stay." Eleanor's eyes flickered with quiet resolve as she stepped inside the room, closing the door with a deliberate click. "Then we move somewhere they can't find us. We're cut off, but not broken. We have what we need, at least for now." Her fingers brushed over the battered notebook resting on the desk, the repository of their combined knowledge of clues and patterns painstakingly woven together. Reed nodded, his gaze distant but firm. "Dartmoor, my cottage. It's isolated enough. No official eyes. We can regroup, plan without interference." He pulled a crumpled map from his jacket pocket,
smoothing it out on the desk. The moorland sprawled across it, wild and unyielding, a stark contrast to the labyrinth of London streets they were forced to abandon. Finch collected his belongings, a small USB stick containing the latest isotopic analyses, fragments of metal whose origins defied logic, and a copy of the Hayes radar tapes that ghostly echoes of 1965 finally brought to light. "It's more than evidence," he said quietly. "It's a message of sorts, from something older than us, watching beneath the waves." The three of them gathered their things with a calm born from necessity, the weight of the moment pressing without panic. Eleanor stuffed her notes and electronic devices into a canvas bag, the soft rustle mingling with the distant wail of a foghorn beyond the Thames. Reed slipped his phone into an inner pocket, the screen still glowing faintly with that impossible lattice beneath the sea. As they stepped out into the damp London night, the fog swallowed the streets whole. The city's familiar contours blurred into shadows and whispers. Finch inhaled the cold, salt-tinged air drifting upriver, the scent a reminder of the North Sea's hidden secrets. The quiet was thick, oppressive, as if the world itself was holding its breath. They avoided the usual routes, weaving through back alleys and narrow lanes, the glow of street lamps distorted by the mist. Eleanor's flat was a small refuge tucked away in a forgotten corner of the city, its walls lined with books and quiet light. Inside, the smell of brewing tea mingled with the earthy scent of rain-soaked bricks. Eleanor moved with practiced ease, kettling water and preparing cups, the gentle clink of ceramic a small comfort against the looming uncertainty. Reed sank into a faded armchair, rubbing his hands together, the fabric worn smooth by years of use. Finch settled into the window's shadow, eyes scanning the rain-streaked glass, thoughts adrift on currents of time and memory. They laid out their trove on the scarred wooden table, sonar images glowing softly on the phone's screen, the USB stick's data files, the radar tape's cryptic waves, and the scribbled notes that connected them all. The room felt suspended in time, a stillness that encouraged reflection rather than action. Eleanor tapped her pen against the rim of her cup, a slow metronome to the quiet. "The pattern," she said at last, voice measured. "It's not random. The probes, the alignment with fault lines and power grids. Someone or something planned this, long before us." Reed's dark eyes met Finch's. And Sterling's reaction, the shutdown, it's fear. Fear of what this means. Fear of losing control. He exhaled, the breath visible in the chill of the room. "But shutting us down doesn't erase the truth beneath the waves." Finch nodded, his gaze fixed on a distant point beyond the window. "He's been managing this cover-up since '65. That's 50 years of silence. But silence won't hold forever." He traced a finger along the edge of the table, the grain rough against his skin. "We have the proof now. The risk isn't just discovery, it's what discovery will do to us." Eleanor leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. "Then we don't expose it. Not yet. We study, we prepare, we wait for the right moment. Until then, we exist in the shadows." Her fingers paused, tightening briefly around her pen. "We're disavowed, but we're free." The room hummed with the weight of their decision, the unspoken promise stretching between them. Finch felt a quiet surge of determination, a flicker of hope amid the fog of doubt. They were no longer sanctioned, no longer shielded by institutions. They were alone, but not powerless. Reed glanced toward the clock on the wall, its hands moving, steadily indifferent to human turmoil. "We leave London at first light. The city's too exposed, too watched." He looked to Eleanor. "Your flat is safe for now, but only for a night or two." Eleanor nodded, eyes resolute despite the exhaustion shadowing her face.
I'll pack what we need, communications gear, a few supplies, minimal footprint. She paused, then added, I'll make tea, for when the doubt creeps in. Finch rose, stretching the stiffness from his legs, the familiar ritual grounding him. He glanced out once more at the fog-cloaked streets, the world muted, but waiting. Tomorrow, we start anew. Away from prying eyes, away from fear. We listen for the quiet signal. Reed stood beside him, placing a steady hand on his shoulder. The more will keep us. The sea secret won't stay buried forever. Eleanor filled their cups, the steam curling upward like a fragile promise. They drank in silence, the warmth a small comfort against the chill pressing in from outside. In that intimate glow, amidst whispered reflections and shared resolve, they prepared to vanish into the margins of a world unready for the truths they carried. The night deepened, the city's pulse slowed to a murmur beneath the fog's embrace. And beneath the ocean's restless surface, the ancient sentinel waited, watching, listening, waiting for the signal to rise once more. The night had settled with a muted certainty, a soft cloak draping the city as they slipped away. The first lights of their subdued departure blinked faintly behind them, swallowed by the thick grey fog that curled through the alleys and over rooftops. Eleanor's hands rested lightly on the wheel, steady, despite the weight pressing against her chest like a slow tide. Finch sat beside her, the worn corduroy of his jacket creaking softly as he shifted in his seat, eyes tracing the tunnel of streetlights blurring into darkness ahead. Reed was cradling the remains of their gathered evidence. USB stick, the metal fragment, and a stack of printouts. His gaze cast out the window, watching the city's edge fall away. The motorway stretched before them, a pale artery cutting through the night country, glistening faintly with the residue of a recent drizzle. The dampness clung to the car's exterior. The faint, fresh scent of rain on asphalt wove into the cabin's stale warmth. Their breaths were shallow, but even. The city's hum faded behind, replaced by a soft, persistent rhythm of tires on tarmac, the occasional distant thrum of an engine rising and falling like a ghostly pulse. Finch's fingers tapped absently on his thigh, a quiet metronome keeping time with Eleanor's low hum of a tune half remembered. Gradually the ribbons of light thinned as the sprawl dissolved into sparser villages, their outlines dissolving into the dark. The motorway gave way to twisting roads, bordered by hedgerows, dense with wet leaves and the skeletal forms of trees. The cool night air slipped in through a cracked window, carrying the subtle fragrance of earth and moss, mingled with the sharp tang of wood smoke drifting from chimneys left burning against the chill. It was a balm of sorts, a distant contrast to the stale office rooms and cramped corridors that had enclosed them for weeks. Reed spoke quietly about the moor, painting it with words, the wide open stretches where the wind could carry a secret for miles, the folds of granite beneath the heather, and his stone cottage nestled in a hidden fold, impervious to prying eyes. Eleanor's fingers tightened on the wheel as she imagined the remote refuge, a place where their footsteps would leave no trace and their voices would dissolve into the vast silence. Finch nodded, eyes thoughtful, as if already pacing the rugged terrain in his mind, the horizon a line just beyond their reach. The miles slipped away under the wiper's rhythmic swish, the windshield catching fleeting glimpses of stars veiled by patchy clouds. It was a sparse, scattered canopy, cold and distant, a reminder of the immense scale that stretched beyond their immediate concerns. Eleanor's thoughts drifted to the quiet signal, the subtle message beneath layers of noise, a whisper from the depths of the North Sea that neither amplified alarms nor demanded attention,
but simply waited. The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. As the road narrowed further, streetlights disappeared altogether, replaced by the occasional flicker of a farmhouse window or the ghost of a distant tractor's beam. Finch's voice broke the silence with a quiet observation about the pattern they had uncovered, the alignment of power lines and fault lines, a carefully orchestrated surveillance, ancient and patient. Eleanor felt a shiver despite the warmth of the car. Reed's dark humour surfaced briefly, a dry comment about the government's stubborn refusal to understand the scale beneath their control, then slipped back into silence. The night grew colder, the windows fogging with their quiet breaths. Eleanor glanced at Reed, who absently adjusted the collar of his jacket, the edges frayed but cared for. Finch pulled the notebook from his bag, pages dog-eared and stained with coffee, their collective lifeline. He flipped through it slowly, finger-tracing the spidery notes and diagrams, a ritual that seemed to tether him to something solid amidst the shifting uncertainty. The car's interior felt like a fragile bubble, a sanctuary framed by the vast, implacable dark. A faint orange glow emerged on the horizon as they crested a low hill, the first tentative light of dawn stretching like a promise. The moor came into view, rolling waves of purple heather and tufts of sharp grass, the ground dotted with granite outcrops slick with dew. The air smelled of peat and cold stone, crisp and pure. Finch exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing with the landscape's openness. Eleanor let the steering ease as the car descended toward a narrow lane, flanked by ancient dry stone walls, their rough-hewn edges clothed in moss. The cottage appeared framed by the soft light, a sturdy, modest building of weathered stone with a slate roof darkened by time. A single chimney breathed thin wisps of smoke into the cool air. The windows caught the pale morning, reflecting the vast emptiness beyond. The silence here was profound, not just the absence of noise, but a presence, a calm waiting. Reed parked the car with a practiced hand, the gravel crunching softly beneath the tires. They all sat for a moment, letting the quiet settle over them, a stark contrast to the storm they had fled. Inside, the cottage was simple but warm. Stone walls held the residual heat of a low fire, and the smell of drying wood mingled with the faint aroma of brewing tea. Reed moved with ease in the small kitchen, lighting the stove and filling the kettle. Eleanor filled the small room with a gentle order as she unpacked essentials, blankets, notebooks, equipment, each item placed with deliberate care. Finch wandered to the window, watching the moor stretch endlessly beyond, his mind pacing unseen paths, the weight of their discoveries pressing gently yet unyielding. They spent the morning in quiet reflection. Eleanor tapped her pen against the rim of her teacup as they sifted through the notes once more, cross-referencing timestamps and geospatial data. Finch spoke softly about the radar tapes, the subtle frequencies that had gone unnoticed for decades, the slow unfolding of a truth too vast for immediate comprehension. Reed shared stories of patrols across the moor, the strange silences, and the inexplicable blinks on instruments that had seemed like ghosts until now. Each voice carried a thread of steadiness despite the enormity of the unknown. The afternoon light shifted through the small windows, casting long shadows across the worn floorboards. Finch settled by the fire, notebook in hand, lost in thought, as the others prepared a modest meal. The silence was broken only by the low crackle of flames and the soft clinking of utensils. They spoke little, each absorbed in their own reckoning with events that defied reason yet demanded acceptance. The moor's vastness seeped into their bones, a reminder of how small they were amidst something ancient and indifferent. Eleanor stepped outside briefly, the cool wind tugging at her hair, the moor stretching in every direction under a brooding sky. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply the scent of wet earth and distant rain, finding a fragile peace. The isolation was both a refuge and a challenge, a place where the noise of the world fell away, leaving only the raw, quiet truth. She returned inside with renewed resolve, the tap of her pen resuming the steady rhythm against the quiet. Nightfall brought a deep blue calm, the stars emerging in careful sequence. The cottage settled into darkness save for the soft glow of a single lamp. Finch remained awake late into the night, the notebook open before him, fingers tracing the lines and sketches as if coaxing secrets from the paper. Reed sat nearby, polishing the fragment of metal under a small lamp, its surface cold and inscrutable. Eleanor watched them both, the trio bound by a fragile thread of trust and shared purpose. As sleep finally claimed them, the wind whispered through the moorland grasses outside, carrying a hint of something ancient resting just beneath the waves beyond the coast. A presence that had waited long before their time, waiting still with quiet patience. The cottage breathed with the night, a solitary beacon poised on the edge of discovery. Dawn approached again, soft and inevitable, promising another day to unravel the stillness and the signal, a secret carried in the deep, waiting for the right moment to speak. The small stone cottage stood stoic against the chill breath of the moor, its granite walls absorbing the muted light of a sallow dawn. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of damp wool and burning peat, a subtle mixture of earth and smoke that clung to the rough wooden beams overhead. Outside, the moor stretched endlessly, an ocean of grass and heather, wet with the night's mist, where the distant cry of a curlew wove through the stillness. It was a world apart, caught between ancient earth and sky, a place that demanded quiet attention. Dr. Alistair Finch sat near the narrow window, his worn corduroy jacket folded carefully over the back of the chair. His fingers traced the cracked leather spine of his battered notebook, pages filled with scribbled equations and hesitant sketches. The light, dim and grey, filtered through the glass and caught the dust motes drifting lazily in the stagnant air. He exhaled slowly, eyes fixed not on the moor but on patterns forming in his mind, patterns that had eluded understanding for years now, settling into a troubling clarity. Across the room, Eleanor Vance watched him quietly, her pen tapping a soft staccato against the corner of her notebook. The sound punctuated the silence, a heartbeat in the stillness. Her sharp gaze softened as she observed Finch's pacing thoughts finally taking shape. The threads they had gathered, the power lines, the geological faults, the elusive signals, now began knitting themselves into a fabric of revelation. She felt a cold excitement stir beneath her measured skepticism, tempered by the moor's solemn gravity. Thomas Reed stood by the hearth, his eyes fixed on a small, dark metal fragment cradled in his palm. The dim firelight flickered across its smooth surface, revealing tiny, intricate ridges that seemed almost too perfect for anything natural. Reed's fingers brushed it absently as if memorizing its weight and texture, the faint hum of the moor's wind slipping through the ill-fitting window frame. He cleared his throat, breaking the silence with a dry, low comment about the fragment's stubborn refusal to fit any known materials catalogue. There was a roughness to his voice, a mixture of frustration and reluctant wonder. Finch finally rose, moving to stand between the small cluster of chairs, the lines of his face settling into something resolute. "It's not extraterrestrial," he began, his voice calm but carrying the weight of conviction. The room seemed to pause, the sound of Eleanor's pen stopping mid-tap and Reed's grip tightening on the metal fragment. The evidence, all of it, points elsewhere. These UAPs, these so-called unidentified aerial phenomena, they're probes from the object beneath the sea. They are terrestrial, far older than us. Eleanor's brow furrowed, skepticism flickering back into her eyes. Terrestrial? You mean like some deep-sea creature? But the signals are electromagnetic metallic fragments, flying objects. That doesn't add up. Finch's gaze didn't waver. Exactly, not organic, at least not in any biological sense we understand. Think of it as an intelligence, an ancient one, that predates humanity and dwells in the Earth's depths. It uses drones, probes, whatever terminology suits us, to monitor tectonic and geomagnetic activity. The power lines, geological faults, all the intersections where these phenomena cluster. They're the sensor's focal points. He ran a hand through his thinning hair, eyes distant. It's a surveillance system of a scale and duration we can barely conceive. The government's fear, Sterling's cover-up, it all makes tragic sense now. They hid it to prevent panic over humanity's inconsequential place in a much older story. Reed let out a low whistle. So we're not dealing with visitors from the stars, but something from beneath our feet. A subterranean intelligence. That's about 1,000 times worse. Finch nodded slowly, because it challenges everything we thought about our place in the world. It's not an invasion. It's a silent observation that has been ongoing for millennia. We're the new arrivals, unknowingly under constant watch. Eleanor's fingers curled around the pen, her voice barely above a whisper. And the probes? The UAPs? They're extensions of this intelligence, sent up to the surface, to the skies, to the electrical grids. It's not an attack, but an ongoing data collection. Yes. The signals correlate with power infrastructure, not by coincidence, but by design. The intersection of human technology and geological fault lines creates a perfect network for monitoring. Our own advancements have provided it with an unparalleled reach. The cottage seemed to settle deeper into itself, the ancient stone walls absorbing the weight of this new understanding. Outside, the moor held its breath beneath a sky softly lightening with the promise of dawn. The room's shadows lengthened and retreated with the slow, inevitable march of time, indifferent to the revelations unfolding within. Reed broke the heavy silence, his voice tinged with dark humor. So, we're basically the unwitting caretakers of a system we didn't even know was there. That'd explain the radar blips, the strange sightings. We're seeing the edges of something vast and indifferent. Eleanor exhaled, her shoulders sagging momentarily as if releasing a long-held tension. And the government knew all along. Sterling's decades of cover-up, it was to maintain order, to keep the collective psyche intact. Finch folded his notebook deliberately, the leather creaking softly. A misguided protection, but one that has trapped us in ignorance. The questions we must now face are not just scientific, but existential. They fell into a contemplative silence, the walls around them seeming to whisper of the centuries that had come before. Finch's mind wandered back to that field in the Cotswolds, to the faint flicker of light he had seen as a boy. A memory now tinged with new significance. The presence beneath the waves, ancient and patient, was a sentinel to a world far older than human ambition. Eleanor's voice cut gently through the quiet. What does it want from us, from this moment? Finch looked towards the horizon where the first pale light brushed the moor's gentle undulations. Not what it wants from us, but what it has always required, a record. A continuous data stream about the planet's shifting nature, and perhaps in time a form of acknowledgement. A signal sent from here might be its first contact with intent. Reed's eyes darkened with a blend of awe and anxiety. So we're about to speak a language that's been silent for millennia? Yes, Finch said, but carefully, because this is not a greeting, it is a response to a signal far older than any human history. The fire crackled softly, sending brief, dancing shadows across their faces. Eleanor rose, moving to the small kettle on the stove, the hiss of boiling water punctuating the moment. She poured 3 cups of tea, their steam mingling with the cold air, a fragile warmth in the vast quiet of the moor. As they sat again, the steady rhythm of the tea's warmth seeped into their bones, grounding them amid the enormity of their discovery. The stillness of the moor outside was a mirror to the calm inside, a space for thought and for the slow unravelling of truth. Finch unfolded a crude map of the coastline, tracing the intersections of power lines and fault lines with a trembling finger. Here, he said, is where the underwater object likely rests, beyond sonar's reliable reach, but within the grasp of these probes. Eleanor leaned closer, her breath fogging the cool paper. And the signal? It's faint but consistent, like a whisper beneath the static. We've been hearing it this whole time, but didn't know what to listen for. Reed tapped the metal fragment again, a faint metallic taste lingering in his mouth. Whatever it is, it's been here long before us and will be long after. We're merely passing through its watch. The cottage exhaled with the creeping dawn, the old stones warmed by the weak sun. Outside, a lone skylark rose into the pale sky, its song a fragile thread connecting past and future. Finch folded the map with quiet reverence. Tomorrow we attempt communication, not through force but through understanding. If this intelligence listens, we must learn its language before it learns ours. Eleanor nodded, her eyes distant but resolute, and we do it quietly without fanfare. The world isn't ready. Reed's grin was brief but genuine. Quiet signals for a quiet war. Night gave way fully today, the moor's raw beauty illuminated in soft muted hues. Inside the cottage, the 3 held their silent vigil, poised at the precipice of a revelation that would change everything they thought they knew. The quiet signal pulsed beneath the waves, waiting. The cottage held its breath in the pale dawn light, the air dense with the weight of unspoken truths. Outside, the moor stretched in muted waves of heather and grass, the occasional clatter of a wind-bent branch punctuating the quiet. Inside, the 3 figures sat close but not touching, eyes fixed on the drifting coils of breath that seemed to give voice to the silence. Alistair Finch's gaze lingered on a metal fragment resting on the worn oak table, a fragment that embodied centuries of hidden surveillance and silent watchfulness. He cleared his throat softly, the sound barely disturbing the stillness. If this intelligence, he began, voice low and steady, has existed on Earth far longer than we have, its purpose cannot be merely observational in the way we understand it. It must be custodial. He paused, letting the words settle like dust in the filtered light. A planetary monitoring system, in essence. These drones, these probes, they're not scouts for conquest or curiosity. They're caretakers. Eleanor tapped her pen against the edge of her notebook, the rhythmic sound a fragile counterpoint to the weight of the revelation. Caretakers? You mean like a natural safeguard? But why remain hidden? Why not reveal themselves at some point, if they possess such power? Finch looked up, his eyes reflecting a distant, contemplative glow. Because their existence isn't about us. We're incidental. The planet itself is their concern. Tectonic shifts, geomagnetic fluctuations, vital signs we can barely perceive. The probes seem drawn to intersections of fault lines and power infrastructure, as if
mapping the veins and nerves of Earth. It's a network older than any human civilization, perhaps even life as we know it. Reed leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, his gaze dark beneath the ridge of a furrowed brow. That's a hard pill to swallow, that we're not central to the story. After everything we've uncovered, the sightings, the metal fragments, the government cover-up, all this, and we're just incidental. His voice was rough, edged with a quiet frustration. Eleanor's breath caught, a flicker of unease passing through her. It changes everything. Not just what we thought we knew about these phenomena, but about ourselves. If there's an intelligence monitoring the planet, indifferent to us, what does that say about humanity's place in the world? The room seemed to grow colder, the early morning chill threading through the cracks in the window frames. Finch stood and began pacing, the familiar rhythm of his thoughts manifesting in his steps. His corduroy jacket rustled softly, worn fabric absorbing the muffled sounds of the moorland dawn. It suggests that our sense of primacy is an illusion. The silence we've observed, the absence of direct interaction, speaks not of malevolence, but of detachment. They observe, yes, but do not interfere. Perhaps they perceive us as one element among many, a small variable in a vast, intricate system. Eleanor closed her notebook, her fingers lingering on the edge as if seeking comfort in the paper's solidity. And yet the probes have been noticed, have been recorded. People like Arthur Hayes have kept silent for decades. The government's cover-up, Sterling's obsession, it all stems from fear. Fear of what exactly? Finch's eyes darkened with the memory of Sterling's steady, unyielding gaze. Fear that revealing the truth would unravel social order, ontological shock as they call it, a collapse of collective belief. Sterling believes humanity isn't ready to comprehend its own insignificance beneath this ancient watchfulness. His cover-up is a misguided protection. Reed's voice was low, almost resigned. So we're left with a paradox. An ancient intelligence, vast and unfathomable, watching silently. And on the other side, a government panicked at the thought of the public knowing the truth. Meanwhile, we sit here, caught between both. The kettle on the stove began to whistle softly, a sharp contrast to the heavy atmosphere. Eleanor rose to pour 3 cups of tea, the aroma of steeping leaves filling the kitchen with a gentle warmth. She handed a steaming mug to each of them. "It's strange," she murmured, "to feel so small, yet so responsible. If this intelligence monitors the planet's health, then what role do we play? Are we caretakers too, or are we the disease?" Finch took a slow sip, the bitterness anchoring him. Perhaps both. We are part of the environment, whether we acknowledge it or not. Our technologies, our industrial expansion, they intersect with the probe's paths. Maybe that's why the signals amplify near power lines and fault zones. We might be unknowingly contributing to the planet's balance, or tipping it. Reed's gaze drifted out the window, where a cluster of clouds skittered across the rising sun. It's humbling and frightening. To think that what we call progress might be invisible ripples disturbing an ancient network, and all these sightings just echoes of something much larger. The cottage has settled again into silence, the only movement the slow swirl of steam from the tea and the distant rattle of moorland grass coaxed by the morning breeze. Finch sat back, fingers steepled as he considered their next steps. Our objective must be cautious communication, not confrontation. We don't even know if the intelligence is conscious in the way we understand. It might be a system, a network, an awareness without intent. Eleanor's tapping ceased. She leaned forward, voice barely above a whisper. If it is awareness, even without intent, do you think it can respond? Could we send a signal that it would understand, that wouldn't be misconstrued? Finch nodded slowly. The technology we've studied suggests yes, but it must be subtle, harmonizing with the planet's natural frequencies, not loud or aggressive, a quiet signal to indicate our presence and willingness to coexist. Reed rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. And if it responds, what then? What if it sees us as a threat? Or worse, ignores us entirely? Then we learn, Finch replied quietly. We observe and adapt. This is new territory, not just for us, but for all of humanity. Outside, a small flock of birds rose, wings beating softly in the crisp air. Eleanor watched their ascent, a fragile emblem of freedom in a world suddenly vast and shadowed with uncertainty. I never imagined my work would lead here, she admitted. From data patterns and intelligence analysis to this. To grappling with the presence that transcends us by millennia. It's a profound shift, Finch agreed, but necessary. To understand our place, we must confront the quiet vastness beneath our feet and beyond our sky. The early sunlight filtered through the window, casting long, pale stripes across the wooden floor. Reed folded his hands, voice steady. Then let's prepare. We know where the underwater object lies. We must ensure our signal is clear, respectful, and above all, cautious. Finch rose, moving to a battered map pinned on the wall, its edges curling with age. He traced a finger slowly over the jagged coastline of Suffolk, pausing where a subtle indentation met the restless North Sea. Here, beyond sonar detection, but within the reach of their probes, a perfect vantage point. Eleanor joined him, her pen poised over her notebook. The timing too, solar activity could amplify our message, a natural resonance. Finch nodded. Yes, the window won't stay open long, we'll need to synchronize our efforts precisely. Reed picked up his jacket, the stiff fabric whispering secrets of distant flights and cold skies. Then we move quickly. The longer we wait, the more we risk someone interfering. Sterling won't relinquish control easily. Finch's eyes darkened with resolve. He fears chaos. We seek understanding. The difference is what defines us. The three stood together in the dawning light, shadows stretching and blending as the world awakened beyond the moor. Eleanor felt the weight of the moment settle deep within her chest, a quiet tension like the calm before a storm, or the breath held in the pause between heartbeats. The ancient watchfulness beneath the waves awaited their signal. In the stillness, the quiet signal was all they could offer, a fragile hope cast into the depths of an indifferent world. The soft light of dawn filtered through the slatted blinds of the APRO office, casting long, narrow stripes across Eleanor's face as she sat hunched over a dimly glowing monitor. The room smelled faintly of coffee and old paper, the air thick with the dust of years forgotten by the world outside. Outside the window, a pale mist clung to the London roofs, blurring the jagged line of chimneys into a ghostly silhouette. Eleanor's fingers moved with quiet precision over the keyboard, each keystroke a measured echo in the stillness. She had pulled a long watch, tethered to shadows beneath the sterile hum of GCHQ's secure networks, peeling back layer after layer of classified files locked away for decades. Her eyes, sharp and steady, scanned lines of carefully redacted text, the blacked-out passages like voids in a map of secrets. She had been searching for Sterling's earliest footprints in the archives, tracing the roots of the cover-up that had shadowed their lives for so long. The name Sir Malcolm Sterling was a constant presence in classified logs, but the real man remained a blur behind the impenetrable curtain of official narrative. Eleanor was not content with half-truths. She wanted the whole story. After a long moment, the screen flickered and a new file opened. The header read, Psychological Evaluation. Subject, Malcolm Sterling. Year? 1966. Eleanor's breath caught softly. The evaluation was heavily redacted, but the words she could glean were chilling in their clinical detachment. The report described a pathological fear of societal collapse, a phrase that seemed almost to pulse with latent dread. Ontological shock, it called the condition, the profound disorientation that came from confronting truths so vast, so destabilizing, they threatened the very foundation of one's identity and worldview. Eleanor traced a finger along the text, as if trying to absorb the meaning through her skin. Sterling's fear was not mere paranoia, but a deep psychological fracture, born from what he had seen in 1965. The evaluation hinted at a breaking point, a moment when reality itself had shifted beneath his feet. The doctor's notes spoke of an irreversible rupture in Sterling's psyche, a fracture that had shaped his unyielding determination to conceal the truth. It was not just fear of exposure, it was a living terror that the fabric of society would unravel if the ancient watchers were revealed. The soft tapping of Eleanor's pen against her notebook had grown rhythmic, a steady counterpoint to the silent hum of the computer. She sat back and let the weight of the discovery settle around her like the mist outside. Sterling had not been a distant shadow behind a desk. The records showed he had been on the ground in 1965, directly managing the initial response to the unidentified activity off the Suffolk coast. His presence had been immediate, hands-on, a fact long obscured by official narratives that cast him as a mere bureaucrat. She pulled up a series of operational logs, their yellowed pages digitized but still faint with the smell of damp paper. A scent that stirred something distant and melancholy within her. The logs detailed coordinated efforts, scrambling of RAF patrols, radar tracking sessions, delicate negotiations with intelligence agencies. Sterling's name appeared repeatedly, meticulously inscribed as the central figure, orchestrating the effort. The files suggested a man who had not only witnessed events that defied explanation, but had also been charged with maintaining strict silence. There was a photograph in the archives, grainy and black and white, showing a younger Sterling standing rigidly in a rain-slicked field, raindrops catching the weak morning light like tiny stars. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, seemed to bore through the gloom. Eleanor studied that image for a long moment, struck by a sudden, visceral sense of the man's burden. This was a man who had carried the weight of a secret for half a century. That quiet, suffocating anxiety cleaving him like cold water beneath the skin. The room grew colder as the morning deepened. Eleanor pulled her cardigan tighter around her shoulders, the fabric rough against her skin. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed faintly, a reminder of the city's continuous pulse beneath the veneer of calm. Her fingers hesitated above the next file. Incident Report, 1965, cover-up operations. Suffolk coast. She opened it with a cautious breath. Within those pages, the narrative expanded beyond bureaucracy into something almost mythic. Descriptions of strange lights over the waves, inexplicable radar echoes, and equipment failures filled the margins. The language was clinical, but betrayed a palpable tension, sharp intakes of breath between the lines, the unspoken acknowledgement that these events had defied every known law of physics and reason. Sterling's annotations, neat and precise, threaded through the documents like a steady beacon, evidencing his hands guiding the response with an obsessive rigor born of desperation. A passage caught Eleanor's eye, describing a moment when Sterling personally surveyed the coastal site under a cold drizzle. The entry noted his demeanor as tense, watchful, clearly affected by what he observed. It was as if the man had glimpsed not just an anomaly, but a fissure in reality itself.
The pages made clear that in those early hours, something had shifted inside Sterling, an experience that had fractured his understanding of the world and set him on a path of relentless control. Eleanor leaned forward, the faint scratch of her pen now a steady tattoo against the quiet. She wondered what it was that Sterling had seen. Something so profound it had shattered his mind's equilibrium. His subsequent efforts to manage the cover-up were not born of mere ambition or callousness, but of a desperate need to protect humanity from a terror too vast to comprehend. Yet in doing so he had become a prisoner of his own fear, locking away the truth in a vault of silence. Outside, the light was growing stronger, the mist lifting in slow, tentative waves. Eleanor glanced toward the small window, watching a flock of starlings spiral upward, their movements a chaotic but beautiful dance against the pale sky. The world carried on, unaware of the layers of hidden history beneath its surface, layers that she was only beginning to unravel. She saved the files into a secured partition, her fingers trembling slightly. The weight of Sterling's secret pressed down on her like the cold stone walls of the Ashdown archives, immense and unyielding. The manicured, composed figure Sterling portrayed to the world was but a mask beneath which lay a man haunted by a vision that had broken something fundamental within him. Eleanor's mind drifted briefly to Finch and Reed, waiting in the moorland cottage, their fragile plan unfolding against the backdrop of these buried truths. Sterling's opposition was not merely political, it was existential. If their signal reached the watchers, it might awaken not only questions, but the full force of Sterling's fear-driven machinery. She closed the laptop softly and rubbed her eyes, the scent of old paper and rain mingling in the quiet room. The air outside had warmed slightly, carrying hints of damp earth and distant wood smoke. Eleanor rose and stretched, the stiffness of late-night guarding leaving a dull ache in her lower back. The lines of code and classified jargon faded, replaced by the raw human story beneath. The story of a man broken and bound by a secret too heavy to bear. In the dim corner of the office, a forgotten radio crystal tinkled faintly as it adjusted frequencies on its own, a ghostly whisper from a past long concealed. Eleanor paused beside it, listening to the soft static that seemed to hum with the promise of revelation and ruin intertwined. She thought of the fragile balance they all walked, the line between knowledge and madness, between silence and disclosure. Sterling's shadow stretched long over their efforts, a spectre born not of cruelty, but of a profound elemental fear. And somewhere beneath the waves the ancient intelligence waited, silent and unmoved, watching the unfolding human drama with a patience that spanned millennia. Eleanor gathered her notes, her pen tapping one last time against the notebook's spine in a slow, deliberate rhythm. The day was breaking fully now, the sky a pale wash of blue streaked with rose and silver. She knew their time was running short. Every moment brought them closer to crossing a threshold from which there might be no return. As she prepared to leave the cramped office, the faint creak of the building settling whispered through the walls, a quiet signal of endurance and hidden truths. Eleanor stepped out into the rising light, the city awakening around her, carrying the weight of secrets poised on the edge of revelation. The narrow corridor of the Ashdown archives stretched ahead like a forgotten artery, the concrete walls imbued with the scent of damp stone and aged paper. Eleanor moved slowly, fingertips tracing the faint ridges on the spines of ancient binders. Her breath was steady, a soft echo in the chill silence, as though the past itself was holding its breath alongside her. Somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of climate control machinery whispered a persistent reminder of the building's solitude. The narrow window panes above were veiled with condensation, filtering the weak April light to a muted grey. She pulled a folder from the shelf, its corners softened by decades of handling. The cover, brittle and yellowed, bore the embossed letters M.O.D. Essex. Operational Logs, 1965. She settled at a narrow metal table, careful not to disturb the layers of dust like a sacred hush. The documents unfolded beneath her fingertips like pages from a forgotten scripture, handwritten notes, stamped telegrams, and meticulously filed reports. The ink had faded to a gentle sepia, but the words remained sharp with urgency. Reading through the first report, Eleanor's eyes danced over the description of lights over the North Sea, flashes that defied radar detection, unexplained equipment failures, and sudden bursts of static that rendered communications useless. The language was clinical, yet beneath the detachment, a shimmer of unease shone through. The author's hand trembled, she thought, as if the truth was a weight too heavy to bear. She traced the signature. M. Sterling. There it was again, his name, quiet but resolute. Her mind drifted to the man himself, Sir Malcolm Sterling, immaculate and composed in his public guise, a man who never raised his voice. Here, in these fragile papers, his carefully wrought facade cracked, revealing a man driven by a terrifying knowledge. The notes hinted at covert operations, midnight meetings, and clandestine orders to suppress sightings. The word containment appeared repeatedly, an echo of something far more profound than mere bureaucracy. She paused, the faint tapping of her pen against the table filling the pause like a heartbeat. What had Sterling seen? What had shattered his mind's equilibrium so completely that he dedicated his life to silence? She pressed on, pulling another envelope from the folder, a bundle of personal correspondence carefully sealed. The handwriting was elegant, almost trembling with emotion. One letter was dated October 1965, addressed to an unnamed confidant. "I have looked into the abyss," Sterling wrote. "What we face is not of this world, yet it is not alien. It is older than our histories, a force beneath the waves that watches, waits. To reveal this truth would unravel the very fabric of society. I fear not for my own soul, but for humanity's fragile grasp on reality." The words struck Eleanor like a cold wind. The man was not a villain, he was a zealot, a guardian of forbidden knowledge. Outside, the first faint blush of dawn crept along the horizon, a pale wash of rose and silver over the sleeping city. Eleanor rose from the table, the folder clutched to her chest like a relic. The air in the archive felt heavier now, as though the walls bore witness to the silent years of suppression and fear. She allowed herself a moment to breathe deeply, the coolness filling her lungs with the scent of dust and old paper. The city beyond was awakening. She could hear the distant murmur of traffic, the low hum of life stirring beneath the grey morning sky. The boundary between knowledge and madness seemed perilously thin in this liminal hour, and Eleanor felt the weight of the secret pressing against her ribs. Sterling's fear was not mere paranoia, it was an existential terror born of a vision so profound it shattered his mind. As she stepped out into the awakening streets, the light rain began to fall, soft, insistent taps on the stone pavement. The scent of wet earth and cold air mingled, grounding her in the present. She pulled her coat tighter, the fabric cool and familiar. Her thoughts turned to Finch and Reed, waiting in Dartmoor, their fragile plan unfolding against the ticking clock of suppression. She passed a small cafe, its windows steamed with the warmth inside. The scent of brewing tea drifted through the open door, a quiet comfort in a world unravelled by secrets, She thought of her own ritual, the calming act of making tea when stress threatened to unmoor her. It was a small anchor, a moment of normalcy in the swirling chaos. In the quietude, Eleanor replayed the fragments of Sterling's story, a man haunted by a vision beneath the Suffolk waves, who saw not aliens from the stars, but an ancient intelligence, terrestrial and eternal. His machinery of fear was no mere cover-up. It was a bulwark against a collapse of civilization itself. Yet in his zeal to protect, he had become the very force that threatened to suffocate truth. The archives had gifted her a new clarity, a grim understanding of the enemy they faced. Sterling was danger incarnate, not for malice, but for the sincerity of his terror. This made him unpredictable, implacable. She knew that their signal, poised on the edge of revelation, risked provoking the full weight of his machinery. The silence beneath the waves was watchful, and Sterling's shadow loomed long. Her phone vibrated softly in her coat pocket, a message from Finch. Proceed with caution. Trust no one beyond the circle. The night deepens. She closed her eyes briefly, the rain light on her lashes. The city's pulse quickened around her, indifferent to the quiet war waged within its heart. Eleanor's steps quickened, the folder heavy in her grip, as she navigated the damp streets back toward the rendezvous point. At the edge of a narrow alley, she paused beneath a flickering street lamp. The light cast long, wavering shadows on the wet cobblestones, the silence humming with latent tension. She felt the gaze of history upon her, the accumulated silence of decades pressed into these forgotten corners. It was as if the city itself whispered the names of those who had sacrificed truth for a fragile peace. Her mind returned again to Sterling. What had he truly seen in 1965? The abyss beneath the waves, cold and implacable, a terror not born of nightmare but of ancient patient vigilance. She pictured him then, alone in a small office, staring at radar screens, the glow casting harsh lines across his resolute face. The weight of knowledge settled like a stone in his chest. The rain ceased as quickly as it had begun, leaving the air crisp and scent-laden with wet stone and blossoming hawthorn. Eleanor pulled the collar of her coat higher and walked on, the weight of the archives pressing gently at her back. Knowledge was a burden, but also a light in the gathering dark. Ahead, the city opened into a quiet square, leafless branches tracing delicate black lacework against the steel-grey dawn. A solitary pigeon cooed, its breath visible in the cold air. Eleanor found a bench beneath the skeletal tree and sat for a moment, letting the quiet seep into her bones. The world felt fragile, balanced on the edge of revelation and ruin. She replayed the fragments of their plan, the signal, the telescope, the risk and the hope entwined in equal measure. Sterling's opposition was no mere political obstacle. It was a clash of worldviews, a confrontation with fear itself. Yet Eleanor resolved that truth, however shattering, must not be silenced. Her pen tapped softly against her notebook, a quiet rhythm in the stillness. She began to sketch the emerging pattern, the intersections of power lines and fault lines where the probes gathered, the silent watchers across the years. The ancient intelligence beneath the sea was patient and inscrutable, but not unknowable. A slow, deep breath filled her lungs. The dawn was no longer tentative, but certain, the pale light steadying into day. Eleanor rose, folding the notebook carefully, and stood beneath the widening sky. The quiet signal awaited. As she turned to leave, a shadow detached itself from the far side of the square, a figure pacing with measured steps, the worn corduroy jacket unmistakable even in the dim light. Finch had arrived. Their eyes met briefly, a shared understanding passing between them. The past, heavy with secrets, folded around their shoulders like a cloak. Together they would face the coming storm, the fragile edge where knowledge met madness, and the quiet signals stirred in the depths. The city breathed around them, indifferent, yet alive. The signal was no longer silent. The morning light seeped through the thin curtains, casting long, pale shadows across the worn wooden floor. Finch sat at the narrow table, fingers steepled beneath his chin, eyes closed, against the quiet hum of the old radiator struggling to warm the room. The air smelled faintly of damp stone and brewing tea, a small comfort amid the weight pressing down on the trio gathered here in Dartmoor. Dawn's fragile fingers stretched over the horizon, illuminating dust motes that wove lazily through the air, caught briefly in the soft, amber spill. Eleanor leaned against the cracked plaster wall, eyes flickering to the folder she held loosely in one hand. The leather-bound archives it contained seemed suddenly heavier, laden with years of silence and carefully concealed truths. Her fingers tapped a restless rhythm against the paper, an unconscious echo of the unspoken tension between them. She could feel the invisible thread tying history's half-buried secrets to the present moment, tangled and taut as a drawn bowstring. Somewhere in the depths below the North Sea, that quiet intelligence stirred, as patient and indifferent as the slow turn of the earth. Finch's voice, when it came, was soft but resolute. We've been looking at this entirely the wrong way. The question isn't how to expose it to the world. That would bring chaos and collapse. What if instead we spoke to it? Privately. A conversation, not a confrontation. His eyes opened slowly, meeting Eleanor's with a calm intensity, the worn corduroy jacket falling softly against the chair's back. We're scientists, after all. Communication is our trade. The words hung in the stillness like a fragile bridge, tentative and shimmering. Eleanor blinked, absorbing the idea, her mind racing ahead, even as her body remained rooted to the spot. Speak to it, but how? It's not a person, it's ancient, vast, beneath the depths, beyond our understanding. We have no language, no protocol. The skepticism in her voice was tempered by a flicker of hope. Hope that perhaps there was another way, beyond force and fear. Footsteps creaked softly from the hall outside. Before anyone could respond, a gentle knock came at the door. Finch rose smoothly, his movements deliberate, the room's fragile calm shifting like the tide. Opening the door revealed Jack Carver, the rugged figure framed by the soft morning light. His salt-and-pepper beard was trimmed close, eyes sharp and steady beneath a weather-beaten cap. A faint scent of seaweed and diesel clung to him, as if the ocean itself had lent its presence. Jack stepped inside without invitation, nodding briefly to Eleanor and Reed, who had just entered from the adjoining room, bringing with them the faint chill of dawn air mixed with peat smoke. "I heard you were talking about signals," he said in his rough voice low and steady. "Might be I can help." He pulled a crumpled map from his jacket pocket, edges frayed and stained. "Been tracking something odd out in the North Sea. Drone patterns, underwater disturbances, might be connected." The map's faded lines traced the shoreline, marked by enigmatic symbols only partially decipherable. Finch gestured toward the cluttered table, inviting Jack to sit. "We need to understand their patterns. You've seen something we haven't." His tone was calm, almost conspiratorial, the kind of voice that could carry immense weight without demanding attention. Eleanor's eyes narrowed thoughtfully, already cataloguing every detail. Reed stood by the window, arms crossed, gaze distant but alert, the practical mind gearing up for what lay ahead. Jack leaned forward, fingers tracing the lines on the map as if trying to coax the secret beneath the ink. They move where the faults meet the power lines, high voltage intersections, like they're listening to the hum of the earth itself. His voice was almost reverent, respect mingling with unease. And there's the matter of the old telescope down in the Peak District. Her activated could be the key. His words hung in the air, charged like static before a storm. Eleanor set the folder down deliberately, the soft thud echoing in the quiet room. A telescope, but it's decommissioned, rusted and silent for decades. What would we do with it? We can't just